You're good.
Okay, I think we're live. If so, make sure to let Adam know in chat that you're seeing this. We should be on both YouTube and Twitter. So, welcome to the third and hopefully final signing session for the Way of Kings tip-in pages. I may have to explain the scene later, but these are tip-in pages. What this is this is the first signature, so it's not even a tip-in page. It's the first signature of the Way of Kings leather bound that we are doing. The first 8 pages, actually. I said 16 last time, but I think it's only 8 pages. And these will be folded, sliced, and stuck in and glued with the rest of the signatures, the 8-page groupings of pages. I sign them like this so that we don't have to unbox each one as it's sent to us, so that when we send it to you guys, it hopefully will be a little less battered and dinged up. Hopefully not at all battered and dinged up. And yes, you won't be able to see it on Twitter because we can't figure out how to stream landscape on Twitter, if it's even possible, so you have to get portrait. But we do have Magellan, the macaw, who is going to be hanging out for at least part of it and trying to eat the pages and my pens. So you can see him on YouTube.
And you can actually see him in the upper corner because he puts you in a square on Twitter.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah? Okay, good.
Good.
So, and Adam is going to be firing questions at me. He's going to grab the best ones and or the ones that make me look the silliest occasionally and throw them at us. What? You can't get on my shoulder. Yeah, hello. Oh, you guys got to see him. Jellybird. He's learning how to say Jellybird. We call him Jello, even though his name is Magellan, because he looks like a bowl of Jello. So yeah, why don't we launch into it? We should later on have Isaac stopping by. So if you guys have questions for Isaac, my art director, he's going to visit. And I've asked Emily to bring over an item or two for show and tell during this stream. So that might help us keep it a little more distinctive.
Cool. This first one is from Facebook, from Jonathan Alder. He says, "Hi, Brandon. From first idea to completed outline, how long does it take you to personally to develop your ideas until you feel comfortable writing? Do standard plot structures ever help you in developing your plots?"
So, 2 big questions here. We'll take the first one. And the answer to that is yes. No, the answer to the second one is yes. The answer to the first one can't be yes. It wasn't a yes or no question. So, the first question, how long does it take me to develop an idea before I feel good writing on it, really depends upon the book. What I do is I am often searching for interesting ideas that will make a story, and sometimes they are just really simple. I keep them all collected in a folder or in a file on my desktop, and they just random ideas. Like, actually, I wrote one yesterday into the file that was Vikings versus Cthulhu, right? Something just sparked my imagination. I'm like, oh yeah, what if there was something that's like a cross between Eaters of the Dead by Michael Crichton, where a bunch of Vikings ran into Cthulhu, or a Eldritch space horror or something like that. Probably will never go anywhere, right? Most of these ideas don't go anywhere. And so, here we go. No, he doesn't like that one as much, but you brought the another one. Okay.
Yeah,
Magellan.
I really wanted him to have that one.
So. Okay, Magellan. Hey, we got you a toy. We got you a new toy that maybe you will be willing to play with instead of trying so hard to get to my shoulder. You love this one. So this is his favorite toy lately. And so, here, come over onto this little this littler one right here and play with your toy. Yeah.
And
ooh, toy.
Cord, so you can plug it in anywhere.
So most ideas go nowhere, and most of them are either something silly, like I just said, or small, or they are I saw a piece of media and I thought, they did something wrong. I wonder if I could do a different version of that, or I read a book and thought, wow, that's a really interesting concept. I love how this made me feel. Is there any other room to explore on this. Mistborn came from reading Harry Potter and being like, what if the Dark Lord won instead of lost? Spoiler, I guess, for Harry Potter. And this is really just the start. And a book will grow in my head for years. Way of Kings, I had the first ideas for Way of Kings when I was 15. I finally wrote the book. I tend to look for... So if you go Google what are the 7 basic plots, or the 5 basic plots, or the 30 basic plots, everybody has different different feelings on how many plots there are. I don't find those terribly useful. They're too vague in general. There are things like rags to riches. And I never sit down and say, I'm going to write a rags to riches story. But what I do sometimes is take a much more fleshed out style of story, like a heist which has certain things to it, or a story like Skyward was based around the idea that there's this kind of story where a kid finds a dragon egg and then learns to fly on the dragon and things like that. And it's not like you can find these online. It's not like there is a specific plot you can secretly buy if you're an author. It's like, here is all of the points on the kid finds a dragon egg story. But what I will notice, and if you become a writer, you might find this method useful to you, is I notice trends. I'll see a couple of books, I'll read a couple of books over years that hit some of the same points. And I'll be like, wow, How to Train Your Dragon and Aragon and Dragon's Blood by Jane Yolen, and they all kind of have this same sort of thing going on, even The White Dragon by Anne McCaffrey. And I really like it. There's something about this plot that is really fun. And so I'll sit and try to figure out what is it about that plot that really works for me. And I'll try to distill it, boil it down, take away the trappings, and ask the why. What is it specifically that's making me have an emotional reaction to this story? And I will then try to take that and build a story out of it, rather than just the trappings of the story. And oftentimes I find that very handy. Did we get YouTube back up and running?
YouTube's back up.
Okay. Sorry, YouTube. I don't know what happened there. My phone is weird. We're trying this on two.
Bandwidth.
Yeah, you think?
Yeah.
So.
I'm gonna, once I get another question, I'm gonna go see if anybody's using the internet upstairs. So this next one is from the, if you're ready for the next one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is from the YouTube chat from King Con 17. They say, which content or subject do you believe is most essential for a fantasy writer to learn prior to writing, and why?
Which content or subject is required? I would say there are no requirements, right? Like, here's the thing. There are plenty of fantasy writers who didn't even read any fantasy before they wrote their stories. And while I often find this bizarre, there's a certain advantage to that, right? Like, you're not going to be unconsciously influenced. I feel like most likely you're going to tread well-worn pathways in the genre if you aren't well experienced with it, but who knows, right? Like, your vision may be utterly bizarre. I would say most of the time the one thing I would recommend is becoming part of the discussion and the discourse by reading in the genre you want to write in, becoming familiar with what makes fantasy a great genre and all the different things that can be done with it. But even that one is kind of out the window in some cases. Terry Goodkind famously says he didn't read fantasy before he wrote it. J.K. Rowling has said before that she doesn't really read a lot of fantasy, though Terry Pratchett has an interesting rebuttal to that he wrote before he passed away, kind of an open letter to her. So I would say read in the genre, but nothing's essential. And one of the great things about writing is you can take whatever it is that you are fascinated by and you can adapt that to become part of a fantasy story. Whether you love soccer or whether you love ancient Persian history, either of those could turn into really interesting things to inform a fantasy story. When I changed my major to English as a young college student, I thought that's what you did to become a writer. I later found out that not necessarily. There are advantages to being an English major. The main one being you can often use your writing as your homework for your classes, which is kind of time efficient. But other writers I know say never major in English. Major in whatever it is that fascinates you, and then use that to make your stories distinctive. This is the John Grisham theory, right? John Grisham, in part, was able to make a name for himself because he was able to write legal thrillers from the perspective of someone who was themselves an attorney and had practiced. And it lent a level of authenticity to his writing that a lot of other people just couldn't replicate. And so whatever you're fascinated in can become the thing that makes your story stand out. So nothing's essential. Now, if you're asking me if I want to give myself the best shot, what should I do? I would recommend a wide field of study. Most fantasy writers, in my experience, do best if they know a lot or a little about a lot of different things. If they've had some psychology, some earth science, some physics, some chemistry, some sociology, some history, good deal of history. These sorts of things are going to be the best for making you into a writer. I actually tried, because I kind of figured this out when I was at BYU. I tried going and saying, hey, do you guys have one of those things where a student designs their own major? And I thought I'd heard of this being in places before. I don't even know what I was thinking, but I'm like, could I do this thing where I take some classes from this major and some classes from this major, and I kind of create a fantasy novelist major? And they looked at me and they're like, we don't do that here. So that was my attempt at maybe wiggling out of the classes that I thought were not as relevant to my future career, and replacing them with things. So instead, I just started going to classes where I was allowed to, where the professors didn't mind, with my friends who were in different majors from myself, and they were really handy. So.
This next one is from Instagram, from Udi Kumra. They say, I am halfway through The Way of Kings for the first time, and I must say the pacing is delightful. What influences or processes led you to writing slower but still excellently paced stories?
So I have always loved epic fantasy. It was my first love. It's what got me into the genre, and then the big long series in specific is what held me in the genre. Things like Dragon Riders of Kern or The Wheel of Time. And I've always wanted to do something like that. One of the issues with epic fantasy is that it has a slower burn, right? You are setting up a 10-book or whatever series, and so oftentimes you need extra levels of world building, extra levels of lots larger cast. You need just need a lot of work to set up a big epic fantasy series. And that often has the side effect of making the book slower. The Way of Kings is my slowest paced book. So knowing that and going into it and saying, all right, what have other authors done to make sure, even though there's a steeper learning curve, even though there's a lot more going on, to make sure the pacing still works. And there are a lot of different methods for doing this. Robert Jordan had a great method, which is really dynamic prologue followed by a narrow single character viewpoint that it brings you into the world and expands slowly until later. I think I had a world you're almost to halfway, or maybe even further than halfway, before we get a viewpoint other than Rand. And this is the way that Robert Jordan did that, right? By taking it big and then going down narrow. I liked that method, but I knew it wasn't going to work for Way of Kings because I knew I had to have all three characters. Plus Zeth is a kind of a B plot. Shallan, Kaladin, and Dalinar all needed to kind of be going at the same time. So what I decided to do is try to make every chapter have its own sense of rising and falling action and make longer chapters. So this kind of gets into the nitty-gritty of writing. But if I'm writing something like Sword or even like Mistborn, chapters are going to go between 2,000 and 4,000 words, with around 3,000 being the average length. And I'm not going to make those chapters necessarily stand on their own. They're going to be a part of an arc. It's going to be like, here is an introduction to what we're going to be doing, and we're going to be faster paced by cutting the chapter at a point that is easily leading you in to another chapter. This is kind of what we call thriller pacing. I'm not fully doing it. In fact, if you read Brent Weeks's Epic Fantasies, he uses thriller pacing quite well in those, and that's part of what makes them work. Jim Butcher does it also in Codex Alera, where you've got these kind of shorter chapters that really pull you through by ending on notes that always are going to pull you into the next one. What I decided for Way of Kings instead was longer, thicker, meatier chapters that each read like a short story. And so each chapter you're going to read kind of has a beginning, middle, and end. And oftentimes, instead of cutting at a really dramatic point, which I will still do sometimes, if you'll notice, they instead cut kind of after a scene has happened and things have occurred, and then you have a segue into the next chapter. And this method, what it does is it makes everything feel a little more cohesive in some ways, but also a little more isolated. Let me see if I can explain why. It means like you have for each chapter kind of a point where you can put the book down. And what this, I feel, does is instead of making you feel like you need to read the entire book in one sitting, which thriller plotting really does. That's one of its goals, is saying you can read this all at once. You can rip through this. I didn't want you to feel that in Way of Kings because the book is simply too big. And it would be too exhausting. Instead, I wanted you to feel a sense of satisfaction that every chapter you read in this book, though every chapter was long, we were giving you this this story. You were always getting a kind of a beginning, middle, and end. And this is what I still look to do in Stormlight chapters. Now, it's not always. You will find that I'm still using the something dramatic happens, cut, new chapter, but usually I am coming back to that character fairly quickly. Either we go right into the next chapter with them, or there's only one chapter wait most of the time. And so it feels like you're watching a television show that has an arc for every episode, and you're able to kind of modulate your reading so that you read how many episodes you feel like at that time, rather than getting yanked by the front of your shirt through the whole thing as fast as we possibly can. And so it's just a different sort of feel that I'm looking for. I want you to enjoy being in the Stormlight world. I want you to feel that it's very rich, but I also want you to feel that something is happening. The other tool I use in the Stormlight books, again, this is very technical, so I'm sorry if this is boring for some of you, is I know that because of how many things are going on and how unusual structure-wise a lot of the plots are, I always try to make sure that there is one central, very relatable plot in a Stormlight book, that even if you're not sure what some of the characters are really up to because your reading instincts are like, wow, this is just odd. I've never really read a story about someone who thinks he's going crazy, or at least his son does, and he's seeing visions, and I really don't know where this is going. I balance that with, in the first book, Kaladin's plot, which is very much me using the what I call the underdog sports story model, where I've deconstructed a bunch of stories that I really like that use this this concept, and I've built a fairly what I think is kind of relatable subplot for him in Bridge 4 that's going to act as like a backbone for the entire book. So even if you're not quite sure where all this stuff with Dallin or Shallan is going, your instincts as a reader, having seen stories like this, can give a real sense of progression to what Kaladin is doing in the first book. And in each of the Stormlight books, I embed a core story like that to just act as our main structure, even if the rest of the book we are only sometimes seeing glimpses of what people are doing.
This next one from the chat from Brent Mulvey, excuse me. Would you let Magic the Gathering do a Stormlight Archive series expansion?
Yes, absolutely. It is one of my dreams. In fact, I've been really excited to see them doing, now they're only Hasbro properties, which Magic is owned by a parent company, Hasbro, but they're doing some of this. They did some Transformers cards. They even have their own kind of new Transformers game that is tied in with Magic, like it's compatible with Magic, but has its own rules and things, which I think is really cool. And they did some My Little Pony cards, which we made sure to get because we have some Ponies fans in-house at Dragonsteel here, and they were for charity. And so if they were ever interested at all, then I would jump at the chats. Now, I don't know how likely that is, because in these days, kind of the philosophy for a lot of companies, which is pretty wise philosophy, and Magic is one of them, is build your own IP rather than relying on someone else's IP. And Wizards of the Coast, has experience with this, right? They have made in the past and lost the rights to various different IPs, including like the Pokemon card game, and I think they did a Star Wars one for a while, and I can see how it would smart to have access to this, to do all this work on something, and then just have the license lapse and get pulled from you. And how you would say, you know what? I would rather just make my own, and they are pretty good at making their own. So, if there were a chance to do this, I would absolutely jump at it. It would be one of my dreams to have it happen, because it is my favorite game. But I'm also not holding my breath, and I'm not going to be offended if this is not something they ever want to do.
This next one from Facebook from Tim O'Reilly says, my favorite sword fight writer is R.A. Salvatore. Who do you think writes the best sword fights?
Bob Salvatore is up there, right? Like, there aren't a lot of people in fantasy who can write a fight scene as well as he does. So, who else is really good at sword fights? I'm not sure if there's anyone better than him. I always found the Wheel of Time's fight scenes to be really interesting because they were written by Robert Jordan, who had served in Vietnam, and they were written like somebody who had been in war. If you read, I think it's in Shadow Rising, where actually it might be Fires of Heaven, where they come back and they have the big fight at Karien, where Matt is acting as kind of general for the first time, and they don't even show you Jim doesn't even show you Matt's big fight with a main, kind of villainous character we've been following for a while. The war kind of happens as a big chaotic jumble, and then you see Matt afterward just kind of trying to decompress and deal with what's happened. That felt very authentic to me, but it's certainly not a fight scene in the same way, or a sword fight in the same way you might expect. So, who's really good with specifically sword fights? I'm drawing a blank of anyone who's better than Bob. So, if you guys want great fight scenes, Bob Salvatore is fantastic.
This next one from the Twitter chat from @Lupus Astaris says, is there any specific instance where you hit something in one of your books that only other Mormons would recognize?
Ooh, stuff I've hidden in the books that only other members of the church would recognize. No, I don't really do this that much. Because my heritage and my faith are both LDS, there are certain things that other people have come to me and said, hey, was this influenced by your religion? I'm like, yeah, it probably was. But I didn't sit down and hide things in there. Most of those are, people notice it and come to me, and I'm like, yeah, that probably did come from that. I'm sure there are some things I've said, like, this wouldn't be, you asked specifically for members of the church, but I think, like, there is a point in the Wheel of Time where Rand says, basically quotes the, there's a line in the Bible where God basically says, before all these other people, I am. Kind of this, before anyone else, before all these other people, there's this I am. I still exist. I exist to them. I still exist. And one of the things that Jim liked to do was put references to Rand kind of echoing or fulfilling or starting sort of mythological things that you can find in many different religions. And I put, this thing where he says, before Lews Therin was, I am, basically, into the Wheel of Time. That was less to be an Easter egg and more because it's the sort of thing that Robert Jordan did, and I thought I wanted a few of those. Of course, I also have Rand perform one of the Buddha's famous miracles, which is being able to release both fire and ice. You happy you got on? From his body at the same time, which is one of the kind of famous things of Siddhartha, the Buddha. And so I was just kind of looking for things like that to put into the Wheel of Time for Rand. Yeah. But I'm drawing a blank on this. I'm sure there are some things I've written that come from my heritage that as I wrote it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of like this, and that other people would notice. But I don't like hide things like that generally. Hey, don't eat my glasses, okay? You can eat my hair, but you can't eat my glasses.
From Instagram, Adia Marie, Scribe for the King, asks, so what books are your children really into right now, and what books do you like to read with them?
So they love Dave Pilkey's books, and I actually really like them too. So Dave Pilkey, if you don't know, wrote Captain Underpants, and he has a series which we like Captain Underpants, but I think his newer series, Dogman, is superior. It is just a really great read. Particularly when I have a son who's dyslexic but loves, having stories read to him, and it's really hard for him to read. But with Dogman, you have really well done graphic novel stuff as well as you have the story. So we read a lot of Dogman. Every time a new Dogman comes out, we have to go buy it on opening day. Right now, we're reading a book called Spy Penguins. That we just kind of picked up off the shelf, and they are really liking that one, so I can recommend that. It's well written and fun. What else do we really like to read together? We love the Bad Guys series. If you haven't discovered these, they are delightful. It's about a wolf and a shark and a tarantula and a snake and a piranha who are on a mission to repair the reputation of so-called bad guy animals in an animal world, and they are trying to go on missions to save and protect things, but they have some bad guy instinct still. Like they go to rescue some chickens, and then the snake ends up eating a bunch of them on accident, and they have to get him to throw these chickens up and stuff. They're very funny. They're very fun. If you like this whole story of bumbling heroes trying with hearts of gold, or in Snake's case, maybe copper, but trying very hard to reform people's opinion of them. Those books are delightful to read with your children. So my eldest, who is 12, prefers, he's gotten to the age where he's liking books that are a little more lengthy and complex, and so he's rereading the Fablehaven books because he never read Dragon Watch when it came out. And so we got him the Dragon Watch books, but he has to get through all the Fablehaven books, he decided, before he can read the sequel series. So he's reading those by my my name buddy, Brandon Mole, for whom I get mistaken at signings once in a while, even still. Happened way more earlier in our two careers. I still want to write a book with Mole someday. And co-write it just so that we can write that the authors are, you're going to get on my head and you're going to mess up my hair and then Emily's going to be annoyed again. So we can just have a book series that is written by the Brandons. What? Which would be fun, right? What do you want to do? You want to get the pen, don't you? Yeah, that's what you really want. Yeah, you're on camera. Now go back up and play with your toys. Play with your toys. Look, you love this toy. Yeah. This is your favorite toy. Play with that one. I'll give you a pen when it runs out. All right, there we go. That was a fun question. Thanks for that one.
Another popular question through these streams has been the inquiry regarding your pen.
Oh,
what kind of pen you're using.
So, Kara, do you want to come on and explain? You're fine doing that, like how we came up with these pens. So, Kara's going to come, maybe pull a chair over. Will she be visible if she sits right here?
On YouTube, she will.
Only on YouTube.
That's
okay. So you on Twitter will simply have to listen to Kara. So Kara is our CFO here at Dragonsteel, and what's your other title? You're like head of
Events and merchandise.
Events and merchandise. She runs the warehouse, oversees it. Mem does the actual warehouse stuff now, but and Kara's kind of our fixer in heist story parlance. She's the one where if we need something to happen, we need like a physical object or something, we say, Kara, can you make this happen? And she goes and makes it happen. So I needed pens that I liked, that worked. So what do we have? Where do we come
So these are Uniball, Signo, Gel, Bold.
Okay.
And it has to be bold because of how fast you write. So we can't have any fine points.
Right.
Because so that the ink has to go through fast.
Yep.
So
this has been our biggest problem is that there's two big problems with using a ballpoint, and this is why I normally use a Sharpie. Is that I have a vigorous signature, and so I will rip pages.
Yes.
We found, like, if I just have a regular Bic even, it's dangerous for me to sign with a Bic because I will rip off the page when I do that. See the end of my signature there. That one's a little too long. This one's going to get chopped. And so, so we needed, so that's what you found is like the heavy, what's it called? The bold.
Bold. Yeah, you have to have the bold.
And I was skipping a lot. Like, I would do it and then you wouldn't get the full signature.
Yeah. So this one, and it has to be the gel because it flows faster.
Flows faster. We need the fastest flowing pen that we can find. As you guys can see, my signature is very fast. So.
But yeah.
Thanks, Kara.
Thank you.
And promotional consideration not brought by Uniball.
Yes, not brought by Uniball.
Yeah.
This is just the one we found. No sponsorship there. My signature, if you're interested in my signature, it started out much more legible. It used to be, in fact, Kara, if you grab me a piece of paper, I'll try and do one that we can hold up that people can see, and I can try and do my old signature, or my versions of my old signature. A piece of cardboard would work too, Kara.
Oh, it's right here.
Okay. And so what happened is I got some advice early in my career, thanks, Kara, that said try to find a signature that moves your arm and not your wrist to save your wrist, which turned out to be really good advice. Originally, you could kind of read my signature. In fact, it was a little more legible than that even, but you can kind of see the Brandon and the Sanderson. I can't even do it now as I used to, but you could kind of read the Brandon. And then over time, it became something more like the second one down underneath, where you can see them melding together. You can see that the Brandon has just become a scribble, and the Sanderson, the S, is kind of looped around. And you can still kind of find some old signatures from the first year of my career that look a little more like that. And then for a while, the S got really big. I can't even really do it right. But you'll find some like that occasionally. And then finally, it became what it is now, where you can see that the Brandon has just become like a hint of the B with a line, and then the big S, the big cursive S. And that is the history of my signature. And this took me only about a year or so to finally develop. My handwriting is sloppy. In fact, I think I referenced earlier, but you already got down on me. You need to stay on your perch. We're going to move you just a little bit back. I know you're going to hate it. But stay and play with your toys. So I referenced Mrs. Sukup, my second grade teacher, who tried very hard to get me to have better handwriting. And if she knew I were a famous author now, she'd just be shaking her head and be like, I tried, guys, I tried. But my handwriting is just not good. It has never been good. In fact, I can still remember the indignance with which my papers were graded in middle school, because I had a history teacher who graded partially on penmanship for the history essays that you wrote, which I still think was a little unfair. But I wanted a signature then that looked more like a symbol. That is something that I could really make my own, but also wasn't intended to be legible. I do envy Robert Jordan and Orson Scott Card and some of these kind of old school writers who still have gorgeous signatures. Like Robert Jordan, I don't know if you've seen his signature, but we printed in the ones I did, Harriet had his name printed in the front to kind of give a stamp of authenticity to them. Did you wiggle this all the way over, or did I just not move it far enough? Just envy that, but not enough to actually change my signature, because I totally could. If I wanted to, I could work on it and make it end up working. But yeah, I really do like the symbol. So
this next one.
Socks.
We put it on our socks. The socks. That's right. You have my signature. So if you buy my socks through my web store, you can have my signature on your foot.
Well, it's on the packaging, right?
The packaging.
It's on the packaging. Oh, it's not on the. Yeah, that's right.
But
Yeah.
It looks really good.
Yeah. The socks are awesome. We had no idea people were going to be interested in socks.
We could always show them.
Yeah, we could.
grab a
I'll go grab some.
Now we're gonna show off how awesome Kara is.
promotional consideration
yeah.
brought to you by us.
By us. This is just Kara and Isaac just kind of come up with what things they want to have, right? And then we make them, and then sometimes people actually want to buy them. So we made Doomslug socks, if you didn't see these. Which when Isaac said, we're going to do socks, I'm like, is anyone going to want socks? He's like, well, I want socks. Yes. So I'm like, okay, I guess we'll do socks. And then people actually like, and then there's Cosmere socks with all the Cosmere constellations from Arcane Unbounded. And World Hopper on the bottom of your foot. And these ones, they have Doom and Slug.
Yeah.
So, hello. These are great. So if there are cool swag ideas you want us to make, Kara or Isaac are the people to talk to, because they make that sort of thing happen.
We have a list. We keep a
list. Like, we do want to do plushies at some point, right? It's just plushies are hard. They're really hard because prototyping a plushie is a long and frustrating process. And then you have to print or make, you got to manufacture a certain number of them and things. And so it is in the back of our head. A lot of people ask for plushies. They ask for Doomslug plushies, and they ask for Sunni pups from the Mistborn books and things like that. And it's on our radar. But yeah.
No promises.
No promises.
Many people are inquiring about the sequel to the Arithmetist.
Sequel to the Arithmetist. So, I can talk about that for a minute. So there's a couple things going on with the Arithmetist that make it difficult. The first one is that the Arithmetist was the book series I was working on when the Wheel of Time came along, and it is the biggest casualty of the Wheel of Time, in that when the Wheel of Time came along, I dropped everything else. And a lot of authors have this issue. If you do a book and then your career changes dramatically, it can be sometimes very, very hard to go back to that book and kind of capture who you were back in that time. So we need another one, Kara. You're okay. Don't panic. But it's sometimes really hard to go back and capture who you were. When I tried to go back to the Arithmetist sequel, I had that problem. It was this sense of, I have to make sure that the sequel fits with the first one. Now, I'm going to be doing this with the Elantris sequels pretty soon, but pretty soon in Cosmere writing terms, which means in 5 years or something, probably after Stormlight 5. But so I will have to kind of learn how to do it. But it was when I went back and I had a shot to do Arithmetist 2 years later. Like, Arithmetist was written in 2007, and then we sat on it for years because I knew getting to a sequel was going to be hard for me. And finally, Tor's just like, we need to release this book. And I said, okay, we can release this book. And I wish I had the foresight to go back and change the ending a little bit so it didn't promise quite so much in a sequel. Which I do still intend to do one, but it was just really hard to get back into it. And then there's some other things, like anytime you're dealing with real world history, it requires a level of sensitivity that, particularly in the first book, I was not as aware of when I was writing during that part of my career. And I wrote some things that I now consider insensitive towards some Native American cultures. They aren't a big part of the Arithmetist, but they are there. And so that puts the Arithmetist in this place where if I go back to it, I need to be a little more aware of what I'm doing, not quite. It's rough because it's alternate history, and so there are things that I am changing about our history, but there are also things that I can change about our history that are insensitive to do. And like I said, I don't think it is a thing that really ruins Arithmetist, but it's there when I see it now, and I'm like, I can do a better job, and I should. But that also means that I can't just rush into a sequel. And so I want to be careful when I write that sequel, and be aware of what I'm doing. And so this will happen, but I don't know when, and I can't promise when, because both of those issues make it difficult for me to get back to it, and have repeatedly made it difficult for me to get back to it.
From the chat, Evelyn Basham says, "Hello, Brandon. Mm-hmm. Have you ever written something you regret because it misrepresented your personal values and beliefs?"
Ooh, what a great question. So here's the thing. As a person, my personal values are changing and evolving over time. And a book is generally a picture of who you were as a writer when you wrote it. And in some ways, I wouldn't want to erase that. Partially because, I've read too many books about time travel where it never goes well for you. But also because it is a snapshot. Like, as James Joyce once wrote, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And that is what a book kind of is a snapshot. I have several times written things that even soon after I thought, you know what, that was me going further than I want to go. But in some ways, writing the book is what teaches me that, right? Like exploring it. A good example of this is the beginning of Steelheart. The prologue of Steelheart is more brutally violent than the rest of the series. And I wrote the prologue, and it was separated by a year or so, or even more, before I wrote the rest of the book. And I had a vision of the book being darker than I ended up doing as the characters evolved and things. And after the fact, nowadays, when I recommend the book, I remember, that prologue kind of, it's over a line a little bit in the level of specific violence that I would like to have in my books, particularly in a YA book. So the prologue of Steelheart is over the line for me. Another example of violence being over the line actually got cut. This comes from Oathbringer, and it's during one of Dalinar's flashback sequences. And there is a sequence where, to not give too many spoilers, he ends up trapped beneath an avalanche of stone. And I wrote a scene where he comes out, he is consumed by the thrill, and he goes to town on the people who are trying to kill him in some really graphic ways for me. Like, nothing maybe compared to what, like, George will write or something. But for me, man, there were heads being crushed and stuff like this. And I wrote this, and it just, it was the mindset I was getting into being Dalinar. And I got done, and I actually didn't come back to it until I was in the writing group. And the writing group was like, whoa! Like, we know Dalinar was brutal, but whoa, do we have to see all this? And I thought, wow, no. We don't have to see all this. I'm going to trim that down. I can still release it online if people want to see it. We'll try to get Adam to get a deleted scene of that put up if you really want to see Dalinar go to town on a bunch of people. But in this case, I'm like, this just felt wrong when I was going back to it. I went over a line I didn't want to cross in the level of brutality in the book. And this is not to be a commentary on anyone else's lines. You may hear this and be like, oh man, I wish that were in the book. But the books are kind of a representation of what I want them to be. So that's an example, went over the line. I do think the initial painting of Ash in the front of Oathbringer her clothing ended up being more transparent than I had realized when we were looking at the artwork. Like, we asked a bunch of artists, this is to paint for the heralds, basically the version of the Sistine Chapel that might exist in Roshar. The 10 heralds kind of represent, instead of the prophets at the sides of the Sistine Chapel. And Dan Dos Santos is an amazing artist, and he wrote he painted an amazing picture of Ash. And I saw it, and Isaac's like, do you think this is a little too risque to put in the front of our book? And I said, no, I don't think it is, because I was looking at like the slit on her dress. I'm like, it's fine. I wasn't realizing that he was saying, hey, this is transparent, and you can kind of see more than perhaps you would want to be saying. And then the book came out, and people were like, hey, why is there a naked woman in the front cover of your book? Now, again, some of you may be saying, really? Brandon, that is super tame. And this all kind of depends on your own worldview and things like that. I remember hearing a cool story once about speeding, where a comedian said, isn't it funny that anyone going slower than you is someone you're like, that such a slow person, how come they can't just go the right speed? That person is terrible. But anyone who passes you, you're like, that person's a maniac. Look at how fast they're going. And it doesn't really matter how fast you're going. You're still going to have this inclination of anyone going slower than you is obstructing the flow of traffic, and anyone going faster than you is a maniac who is going to cause bodily harm to everyone around them. Obviously, not 100% true, but it rang true with me. And I feel like that's how this sort of thing goes. And for me, Ash's outfit was too transparent. And we had we talked to Dan, said, hey, can you just make the dress a little less transparent? And he's like, oh yeah, sure, absolutely. Had no problem with it. And in the second printing, the dress was where we would like it, which still to some people is probably too transparent, and to other people you're like, you silly Mormon, why do you even care about this? But it is, part of my moral compass, and so I want to release the books where I feel comfortable. And so there's a couple examples for you for things like that. But at the same time, like I said, it's a snapshot of who I am at the time, and there's a value in that. Even, I'm more, to be perfectly honest, embarrassed by the fact that I've gotten much better at info dumps over the years, or that I've gotten much better with dialogue over the years, I feel. And so going back to those old books, I cringe more about things like that. But anyway, there you go. Oh, here's Emily. Did you find it? Ooh, here's some show and tell. Oh, you found the old signature pages. Oh,
Do you remember that?
great job! Wow, Em. I didn't even realize we had these.
Yeah,
So
I kept them because I thought they were so funny.
all right.
That was the really early one.
This is really early, so you can see me trying to come up with what became my signature. And this is the first year I'm published.
Yeah.
That I'm trying to come up with
Look
it.
what it's on the back.
Yeah,
of.
on the back of. So you guys are gonna love this. Orem, Utah, Cherry Hill State Conference. There's some Mormon lingo for you. So this is April 9th, 2005. So Elantris launched in April.
In May
of 2005.
And I didn't even meet you till November. So.
And yeah, Emily didn't even. How'd you get these?
We saved them all.
We saved them all, but you didn't even know me back then.
Yeah.
I
had Jane catalog them who filed them.
Jane's my sister who, so you can see me trying to develop my signature. And that's kind of what it looked like. The B is a lot more BE than I remember, but that's how it looked like in Elantris. Was I was trying to develop this, and you can see me in this one, like the B trying to turn my the D in Brandon into a little bump, and things like this. Like these are that's pretty awesome. Show and tell time.
Do you want me to take that bird back, or is he okay?
Oh, he's probably okay. He's trying to get to you now.
Yeah.
He really likes it when Emily gives him scratches. You want some scratches? No, you don't want them from me. All right, here's show and tell time number 2. So
I'm thinking that's the right one.
this is the right one. So what is this? A lot of you may know I served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, right? In Korea, in Seoul. And missionaries have one day off a week, basically. They call it P-Day. It's not a full day off, but it's basically a day off, right?
P-Day for preparation.
Preparation day, yes. It's very common that that missionaries will go play basketball or something. I'm not a sports fan. I appreciate sports, but
on my mission we played soccer.
You played soccer, yeah, because you were in Bolivia. And so I bought this sketchbook because I wanted something that I could write in while watching my companions play basketball, and this is White Sand, my first novel, handwritten in '95 on these sheets of paper and you can see me like crossing things out and doing revisions and making my own kind of little dotted line here to do a scene separation and stuff like this. And I just filled these things, right, with these tiny things where I can still read it. He wants you to visit him today, Kenton repeated. Who? Regent, the tower seat. This is. I wanted you guys to see this. If there's ever a Brandon Sanderson museum, that needs to go in it. That's how I wrote my entire first novel that I ever finished. Though I didn't have a lot of time, one day a week. I didn't finish it those 2 years on my mission. I came back and got a job.
Before I go, your children want to come on.
Okay, we're not supposed to warn people when the children come on. They get mad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, your children, don't be warned.
Yeah.
Your children are going to come on.
They got so mad at me last time, guys, that I warned you. So be surprised when they show up.
They totally know.
So I finished that book by when I got home. My mom, who I've spoken about before, my mom is amazing. She's, like I said, she's an accountant. She likes to plan things, and she already had a job waiting for me when I got back, because I got back in the middle of the semester, so I could go back to school. And the job was selling ties at a kiosk in the mall in Idaho Falls, Idaho, because while I was raised in Lincoln, Nebraska, my parents moved to Idaho while I was away on my mission. So I came back to a job selling ties, and it was actually a pretty good job because it was during the holiday season. It's one of those kiosks they set up for the holiday season, but the mall had a rule that you couldn't talk to people when they were walking through the middle of the mall to just keep people from being solicited by every kiosk. And so you could only talk to people if they came up and started looking at your kiosk, which was great, right? I'm not going to have to bother people. If they are interested, I can help them. But that also left lots of downtime for me to work on the stories. I had that. I also had a second job, which was selling corn out of a truck by the side of the road. These are the great things my parents had lined up for me when I got back, and both of those left me time to keep working on the book. And then I eventually got it all done and typed it out and had my first novel finished. I think I finished typing that out after I'd gone back to BYU and I finished the book. And so really it took me from about 95 until 98 to write my first book. But part of that time was only one day a week. So thought you guys might find that cool.
The next one comes from Twitter. They want some advice for blank page syndrome.
Yeah, blank page syndrome. So blank page syndrome is looking at opening and looking at the blank page and being intimidated by it. Most of the time, blank page syndrome can be solved by one of two main things. Doesn't work for everyone because all writers are different, but two pieces of advice. If you are naturally more of a discovery writer, you don't like having an outline makes you feel like you're too constricted and constrained, makes you feel like you've already written the book and so you're not excited by it. If you are this, then writing sprints are your friend. Writing sprints are where you basically are going to, it's named a sprint for a reason, you are going to get yourself into the writing mindset by picking a prompt that has nothing to do with your story. And you are going to time yourself for 15 minutes, and you are just going to write on that thing for 15 minutes straight, not caring about the content of what you're writing because it's not going in your book. And it can be something as simple as write about your favorite meal, or write a monologue from one of your main characters talking about an average day in the life of, being this character. What's an average day look like? And you're just gonna sprint. You don't care about the content at all. You are warming up, basically. And a writing sprint can be a great way to just get your brain into this mindset of, I am writing now. You can reinforce that by always turning on the same playlist when it's writing time, always writing in the same place, and doing it at the same time of day to basically trick your brain into having this habit of, this is when we write. You can also try doing the writing sprint longhand. Sometimes when people are having trouble getting into something, writing longhand is easier. If you are an outline writer, then you can also... Hello! You gonna talk to us? Usually we have to bring him a mirror and show him the bird in the mirror that he will want to talk to. Or we have to have him in his aviary wanting to get out, and then he will go through his repertoire of things to say to draw our attention. You can work on your outline. Outline is a great way to get past blank page syndrome. Now, don't work on your outline so much you never get to writing. But what you can do is you can say, I'm going to outline what I have to do today. I'm going to look at what are my goals for this chapter. What is the character going to learn? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? What does it smell like in the place that the character is? And you can build some bullet points and just take a half hour, 15 minutes, and come up with some bullet points of things you're trying to accomplish in this day's writing. And what this will do is it'll offload some of the tension for you to the page. Like, writing requires you to keep so many things in your head. It can be very tense to be like, I have to get all of these things right. There's so much that I have to do. Where instead, you can say, okay, I don't have to focus on the plot because I know what I'm achieving here. I don't have to focus on the character arc because I have 3 bullet points telling me the things I need to achieve in this chapter so that the character arc will fit in with the rest of what I'm doing with the book. And it just kind of offloads some of that to your outline, and then you can just ask yourself, all right, what's a really interesting way to start? And you can just go with that. Try those 2 things and see if they help you. So is this stack number 3, Kara, that we have done?
I believe so.
Yes.
Stack number 3. So we have 13 of these to do. We are almost a quarter of the way through our stream for the day.
So a few more hours left.
Yes, a few more hours left.
I did see some complaints from previous streams saying that we didn't celebrate piles being completed enough. They want a bell or something.
Oh, but piles being complete. We should come up with something for a future. So this is the end of the Way of Kings ones, but didn't we just reorder 2?
We have Elantris and Mistborn sitting in the garage, and we have the second printing of Warbreaker on its way.
Wow. Okay. So this is going to be a monthly thing at
Yes.
least.
At least.
There's not as many, but there's...
Not as many, but you will see us coming back and signing again in a couple of weeks doing this. It's more fun to do this in front of, so hooray! There you go, celebration. We'll come up with something.
Yeah,
We'll have a button we can hit and confetti will shoot out. And
Ooh,
then,
that'd be fun.
yeah, that'd be fun,
friends-
except then you have to clean it up, which, yeah, well, she would clean it up.
Yeah, I would have to clean up.
Yeah,
Kara's
yeah.
not cleaning
Yeah.
Our friend, I can never pronounce his name right, but Evgeny.
Oh, Evgeny, yeah.
He
Hey,
says that we should get a gong and hit for every stack.
Ooh, a gong would be fun.
Gong's a good idea. Yeah.
Just get a little, like,
Um,
8-inch gong.
Yeah.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
All right.
Okay, this next one is from Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
from Sarka Slobodova.
Okay, cool.
She says, greetings from the Czech Republic.
Greetings.
I just finished the Reckoner series, and I am wondering, how did you come up with the story, and if you use some kind of database like David or Tia did for all your epics because of the many powers and weaknesses?
Yes. So, first question, how did I come up with it? This has a great story. I'm sorry for those who have heard this story, but I came up with Reckoners because I got cut off in traffic. So the story is, you get the long version because we're on the stream. Story is, in the early days of my career, the way I went on tour was by driving it up the West Coast. And this started because Dave Wolverton / Dave Farland, as his pen name, who is one of my writing mentors, when I sold a book, said, hey, why don't we go on a tour together? That way, people who come to see me will find out about your books, which is just, Dave is a super generous person. And he wanted to go on tour with me because no one would show up because it was, my early days of writing. So we went on tour for Mistborn. And what we did is we went to the publisher, and tours can be kind of expensive. So when we said, send us on tour, they're like, well, we'll send Dave on tour. We're not sure about Brandon. He's brand new. And oftentimes, the rule of thumb back then, it's probably more now. The rule of thumb back then was about $2,000 a day to send an author on tour. And $2,000 is, by marketing budgets, maybe not that much, but for a book like mine, was quite a bit. A 10-day tour, is costing quite a bit of money in that case. And this is because they have to fly the author to a place, pay for their meals, put them up. Usually they pick very nice hotels because that's just what they do. And usually they pay for a media escort, which is someone who's an expert in all the local bookstores. Basically like a chauffeur who also knows how to help run a book signing is what a media escort is. And they can be expensive, and all of these things are, kind of come together when your author is probably going to sell 10 books as a new author, if they're lucky, at each signing. So the publisher is making, $100 and spending $2,000, which is why they don't often send new authors on tour unless they really think they can jumpstart something. So, Dave and I went to them and said, how about this? You give us $2,000 each for the whole tour, and we will make it work. They're like, really? Okay. And so we drove it. We stayed in, we split a hotel room, and we did not stay at the Ritz-Carlton. We stayed at the Motel 6, and spent $40 on a hotel room, split between the two of us. And we did a 10-city tour it ended up being like $2,100 each. And the publisher thought this was awesome, right? And it was really economical. It did a really good job. This is when, back when there were a lot more bookstores than there are now. And so what I would do, this was my addition to the tour. Dave had never done this before. Is I said, let's just go visit all the bookstores in the cities we go to and give them copies of our books. Give the staff copies of our books to read. And Tor was more than happy to give us, boxes of paperbacks. So I went around giving copies of Elantris to all these booksellers. I still get some of them coming up to me at signings these days saying, thanks for the free book 15 years ago. And did this a lot in San Diego and just all up the West Coast. We would go from Vegas to San Diego to LA to San Francisco to Seattle and Portland, probably not in that order, and then back through Idaho. This is when I did signings in Boise, which they have never sent me back to Boise, and a lot of people from Boise complain. In Idaho Falls and Provo, I don't know if that's 10, I'm probably forgetting one, but basically that was our loop. So I did this like 3 years in a row. We brought Lee Modisett with us one year, who is a fantastic individual who has also been just really nice to me in my career when he didn't need to be, when I was nobody. So show Lee some love. Great fantasy writer and science fiction writer, he would have me remind. And did this 3 years, and it was becoming quite the cool thing where people would come out to see all three of us. And then the Wheel of Time happened. And yeah, a couple things happened. First off, before the Wheel of Time happened, Mistborn took off. And if you guys don't know this story, there's a story within the story. The closest my career came to ever failing was with Mistborn. Because what happened is, when you're a brand new author, you have this certain shininess to you because you are a brand new unknown quantity. And this was a much bigger back in the day when bookstores were a bigger force. One of the things that the loss of bookstores has hurt that a lot of people don't know is new authors. Because having the new arrival bay at bookstores was much better at selling brand new authors than online distribution has been. It's been much harder to launch new authors nowadays. But back then, people would go to the new arrival bay, they would see a hardcover by a new author from Tor, and they would give it a certain amount of interest just because Tor didn't launch a lot of authors in hardcover who were brand new. If your first book was released in hardcover by Tor, you were probably the only new author that they were doing that with for that month and maybe a couple surrounding months. And so Elantris got a lot of attention. There's a reason why you're most likely to win an award in sci-fi fantasy with your first book. Your best chances of ever winning, statistically, are on your first novel. This is just because, that shyness factor. It's a very natural kind of human thing. And so I know Adam's smiling at me because we're like embedded in 3 stories in now on this thing. This is what happens. This is what happens when you're an epic fantasy writer. Occupational hazard. So Elantris did pretty well. It sold 10,000 copies in hardcover, which, it's not breaking any sales records, but anyone who can sell 10,000 copies in a hardcover is an author that, at least in the old days, was someone who was, was always going to be publishable. If that you hit that threshold, that book is profitable. It's not paying for anyone else's books, which is what publishers really want, which are the big sales by the big authors that can make it so you can take risks on a lot of smaller authors. But it was it was good. Then Mistborn came out, and so I lost the new author's shine, which everyone has to do. That's that's the thing. And I felt Mistborn was a stronger novel than Elantris, but no longer new author shine, and it was not a sequel to Elantris. Now, there's a lot to be said about sequels, right? And the genre that we are part of, why there are such big, long series. I only do a big, long series if I feel like the story demands it and it's what I want to do. And very early on, my publisher tried to get me to write a sequel to Elantris, and I said, maybe someday, but that's not what I want to do right now. I want to have Elantris be my calling card to the readership of fantasy. I want to do a standalone. Some of my favorite epic fantasies are standalones. I really liked how Elantris worked, and I wanted to do Mistborn as a trilogy. But because Elantris, it wasn't a sequel to Elantris, then people weren't necessarily, you really want that pen. You really want that pen. Do you have the other pen? Why don't you get that one that ran out that I gave you? You do deserve a pen. You've been a very good bird. Okay. What's this? Oh, yeah.
Unless you just want to keep it.
There you are. There you are. Okay, let's put you back up, and you can have your pen.
Do you want me to find something to secure this a bit more?
No, it's fine.
All right.
He's a wiggler.
He will just put it into his food. Adam held up a thing saying that he probably wants to move so that we do some of this on Facebook as well. So we may, at a break point, move the Twitter one over to Facebook, just because there are people who want to watch it on Facebook, and
it will still be on YouTube.
It'll still be on
So you
YouTube.
can move on.
But we're trying to balance. Maybe eventually we'll have 4 of these cameras here, because we hear those of you who want us on Twitch also. But for now, we'll finish these stories, and then maybe we will move the YouTube one to Facebook.
YouTube or Twitter?
Or the YouTube one will stay, and the Twitter one will go to Facebook. Yeah. So anyway, Mistborn came out, and it was not a sequel. And so people weren't rushing out to buy it in hardcover, right? Like, this is a thing. And I totally can understand it, but they were just not really excited to get it. They were buying whatever new author was out, or they were buying the sequels to things they had wanted to read. So Mistborn in hardcover underperformed Elantris by about 20%, did like 8,000 copies. And the publisher was like, maybe this guy is not going to make it. And they decided to do a new cover for Mistborn going to paperback. And John Foster is an amazing artist. He did all the hardcovers for Mistborn. And they commissioned him to do the paperback. And the paperback was one of those covers that just did not work. Sometimes you have a great artist do a bad cover. This is one of the worst covers I've ever had for this paperback. You can go find it online, the original cover. John Foster is really great with monsters a lot of times, and there's a lot of kind of distortion on his figures, stylized. And the way he drew Vin was really weird on that cover. And he drew an Inquisitor that looks just kind of like a Grim Reaper, and the color palette was this like washed out brown, and like it looked like a red that had been sitting in the sun too long. It was a rusty red brown that just was not an appealing color palette, and that book in paperback sank like a rock. Sold almost nothing. It just vanished. And at the same time, the orders were coming in for Mistborn 2. And there's this thing during the bookstore era, this was a bigger deal, that bookstore chains would model how much they order of a book based on your trajectory. So if you had looked at your, a book from 2 years ago had sold 10,000, and then a book last year sold 8,000, they would order 6,000, right? Because they're like, okay, we can see the trajectory. If instead you're going up, they'll order a little bit more. So Mistborn 2 orders came in, and they were 20 they were 40% lower than what had been ordered for Mistborn, or even like what they probably ordered around 10,000 because they didn't have any data points, and then they sold 8, so they ordered 6, and so this is what was called the death spiral, and this is the closest my career came to crashing because the Mistborn paperback did not sell, and the orders for Mistborn 2 just were really small. And so at that point, we were in some serious trouble. My publisher and my agent and I went to the publisher and said, you need to put a new cover on Mistborn. This book is really good. People are going to really like this book. You need to do this. And they're like, no. We were pushing kind of wrong. We wanted them to put the hardcover cover on. And they're like, no, this is not the cover. And we're like, this is the cover. Do something, please. They're like, no, it just looks like this book didn't connect with the market. And then the saving grace was you guys. Because turns out that even though fewer people read Mistborn, the people who read Mistborn loved it. And because of that, Mistborn 2 came out, and everybody wanted it. And so by ordering too few copies, what happened is they sold out week 1. They were just gone. The publisher sold out. All copies were gone, and we were getting flooded with emails of people saying, I wanted to buy this book. Where is this book? Why is it not here? Because they underprinted it. And that convinced Tor, well, maybe we should release a new cover for Mistborn. Maybe there is some interest here. So they had to reprint on Mistborn 2 hardcover, and soon after they released the $5 edition of Mistborn. Some of you may have this edition. It has the cover that is now the same cover, but it had like a big $5 banner on it. And they're like, all right, we'll give this one more try. And they released that $5 edition of Mistborn, and that one flew off of shelves. Just could not keep it in print. And the book just really took off. Well, you're doing a number on that, aren't you? So let's see. This would have been launch was 2005. This would have been 2006 for Mistborn. So this is 2007. And so this book just takes off. And so on the last of our tours that I did with everybody together, which was also in 2007, the last one I did with Dave, suddenly the crowds were growing big. By what I thought was big back then. Like normally we've been attracting about 50 people to the signings, and we started attracting 100, 150, which involved 100 to 120 people to see me, and 20 people for each of the other authors, which you may be like, oh, feeling bad for them, but that meant they had a larger audience to sell their books to, so they were actually both very happy. Larger numbers at a signing like that is good for everyone. I started to really take off. And then I got asked to do the Wheel of Time, and the Wheel of Time announcement came out at late 2007. And that changed everything again because everyone's like, who is this guy? And so the signings suddenly grew beyond what I could do touring with someone else. It at some point becomes just too unwieldy. And this is, we're going to get to Steelheart. This is when this is my tour for Mistborn 3, I believe it would be at this point, 2008. At this point, the publisher's like, okay, you can't do this little tour thing you've been doing anymore. You have to move up to the 2,000 a day super tour that is for a headlining author. And I'm like, I don't want to. I like driving myself places. Can we do some sort of hybrid? And I pushed, and they finally relented and allowed me to rent a car because they wanted me on the East Coast as well as the West Coast. And I flew to see Harriet and talk over what we were doing on the Wheel of Time books. And then the idea was that I would drive up the coast of the East Coast like I had done on the West Coast earlier, and I would do a tour that way. Which, you know, for someone from the West who thinks they are experienced with driving because they've been in LA, LA is difficult to drive in, but it's a different kind of difficult than DC and Boston. Let's just say that. It's not just about the traffic. LA is about the traffic. DC and Boston and Manhattan are about something else entirely. So, number one, my eyes were open to driving downtown DC and Boston, me saying, maybe I do want a chauffeur for these. And the other big thing that happened is I got caught with a knife by TSA. Fun story. So, I told you this is going to be the long version. So I had gone on a picnic with my family, and we had brought meat and cheese as part of the picnic, and I had a steak knife in my backpack that I forgot was there. And so I went through security, and they found it. I'm like, what could this be? They pulled me aside, and the person went in, and they pulled out a knife. I'm like, I just tried to sneak a knife on a plane. So I was quite flustered. Yes, good imitation. And so I was flustered. They were just like okay with it. They're like, oh yeah, it's a steak knife. Can we throw this away? I'm like, yes, throw it away. But what had happened is when I gathered my things after going through security, I stacked the little bins, and I stacked one on top of my laptop. One. And so I didn't get it out, and I left my laptop in the bin underneath. Which meant I didn't, until I was on the plane, realize I had left my laptop. This is pretty crushing when you're going to be going out on a tour for a while and you're going to need your laptop and you're going to spend several days before taking notes about Wheel of Time things. Fortunately, when I landed, they had the laptop, TSA did, and I sent someone to get it. That wasn't the problem, but the problem was the phone cord I had brought at the time to charge my phone back in the kind of dark ages before standardization and we have, the USBs and stuff, connected to my computer, which meant that I didn't have a phone cord. Or I did, but it wouldn't work with just outlets and things like that. And I didn't realize how much a problem this would be until I started driving from Harriet's to, I think I was heading to Pittsburgh. I had my maps. This is before, I had physical maps. I thought it'd be okay, but I still got lost. Driving on the East Coast is hard. And because of this, I worried be late to my signing in Pittsburgh. And my agent was waiting there for me to help me on this tour, but I couldn't call him and let him know. So this is a big, long story to tell you my state of mind as I'm driving, watching the hours count, not knowing how far I have to go because I can't use GPS because my phone's out of batteries, and being extremely stressed and thinking, I am going to miss my book signing. This is a disaster. And then someone cut me off in traffic as I was driving in this very stressful situation. And I am a very even-keeled person, right? But that time I got cut off, I said in my head, I wish I could just blow your car up right now. Like, if I had superpowers, this would be my supervillain moment, where I cross the line, and I imagined myself just completely destroying that car that had cut me off. It was a very cool Michael Bay effect. Lots of explosions, tires on smoke flying through the air, me kind of whizzing through the smoke in a very cool way. And of course, immediately after that, I was horrified because, I really meant it. I really thought I would do that if I had superpowers right then. So maybe simulcasting is not something that we can actually manage.
Unless we can get our internet increased, which I don't think we can.
Right. Well, my house, we're at the house next door, which is my business. My house is getting a line for the theater.
Oh, okay.
That's going to be quite a bit of bandwidth. So that might also be something else. If you can get a receiver over here that you can put one on the home network and one on the work network for future. But we're back on YouTube. Okay.
Well, it's showing on this. It's not showing on my computer.
Okay.
We're good.
We're good. Okay, YouTube. We are back. So I imagined destroying this car that had cut me off, and I was horrified. And I thought, I write about heroes. I write about people, being given these powers and then doing good with them. But I would go around blowing up people's cars because they mildly inconvenienced me. And that was the start of Steelheart. The start of Steelheart, I spent the rest of that drive instead of stressing about my signing, which I did make. I thought about what a world where people started getting superpowers, but there were no heroes, and it was just a supervillain apocalypse where people like me just started blowing up cars because they felt like it, and no one could do anything about it. And this is where the book series came from. I basically had the whole book in my head by the time I arrived for that signing, and I wrote the prologue on that tour. I didn't have a laptop, so I can't remember how I did it. Probably longhand. Or maybe I bought a new laptop. Either way, I very soon had that prologue, though it took me several years to actually get back and write the book. It was one of those great ideas that consumed me for hours as I was driving, and that's where the book came from. We're gonna hop over to Facebook now. So Twitter. Sorry, you can go to YouTube or you can head over to Facebook, and we will try to do some more with you guys in the future. Thanks for watching the stream.
Okay, so let me get you another question while I switch over.
Mm-hmm.
This one is from Instagram from Pablo Escobaggins.
Okay.
What is your favorite character that you have not written? Oh, and then we're going to be having Isaac come down in a few minutes.
Okay, Isaac will be here in a few minutes. Favorite character I have not written. Jean Valjean, probably. I really like Les Mis. I saw the play when I was in high school, and it was my first experience with a really well done Broadway style play. And the traveling cast was awesome. And I was on like the second row because they had it showing just for students, and they got us. I just ended up in the really nice seats just randomly. And it blew my mind. And it was one of my father's favorite books because he served his mission in France and loved French literature. And it was one of my mother's favorite books because she just loves the themes and story. So it had like a personal connection in that way. And so I then went and read the book. And it is one of the, the only classics, one of the first classics I can remember really loving. I now have actually read lots and loved lots. But because of that, I love Les Mis for depicting heroic characters who are also deeply flawed. And for that idea of let's not paint someone black or white, let's paint them who they are and kind of at the same time show some genuine nobility to humankind in some of the worst situations imaginable. And that really struck a chord with me. So my favorite Wheel of Time character is Perrin, for those who are curious. All right,
now we're going to switch.
We're going to start up on Facebook. Maybe.
You're good.
Hey, Facebook! Welcome to the Brandon Sanderson stream. I hope you guys find and enjoy this stream. I am telling stories and occasionally being climbed on by a bird and signing a whole bunch of sheets of paper that are going to end up becoming books eventually. And we are just taking questions from all around. You can ask them here or you can ask them anywhere. And it may take a few minutes for people to actually find the stream, but all right.
Okay, so next question for you. Sorry.
All right. Yeah.
This one's from Twitter, from Sean Dick.
Mm-hmm.
It says, new writer question. Would you recommend a new writer start by writing a full novel, or would it be better to focus on writing short stories, random chapters, particularly if their goal is to write full-length novels?
So if your goal is to write full-length novels, you should start with novels, would be my recommendation for most writers. Now, this was not the advice that was generally given back in the day. Once upon a time, there were more short story markets in sci-fi fantasy than there were novel markets. And you generally got picked up for a novel by writing some short stories, gaining a reputation as a short story writer, and then going on to get a novel contract. But then some things changed in the publishing industry. Number one was sci-fi and fantasy became mainstream genres step by step. A lot of people see this happening in the 2000s because of the movie business, and certainly it's accelerated nowadays because of that. But it really started way back when, in the 50s and 60s, when what was considered pulp or teenage fiction was becoming something that adults wanted to read also, and that would have a wider audience base. And the emergence of the hardcover as a form that you could, sell. Basically, the way the publishing industry worked for these years as this was growing was hardcovers made the actual money, and paperbacks were just around so that people could still continue to find authors. There are, a paperback still could make money. You could sell a lot of books, and even still you can sell a lot of books as a paperback, but for a lot of the niche genres, like epic fantasy, when hardcovers started to take off was when they could actually make a good profit selling fantasy novelists. And this didn't happen until the 80s and 90s. Why this is so important is because sci-fi fantasy has a smaller but more dedicated fan base than a lot of other genres. So, for instance, when we release a new Stormlight book, we can take on anyone and beat them for the #1 spot on the New York Times list. It's not guaranteed, but we can beat them, right? Like, I have released books that have unseated Dan Brown, or that have been the same week as Grisham, and we have taken the #1 spot. And we can tangle with anyone and potentially come out on top. It's not, like I said, a guarantee, but we can do that. Second week, no way, right? Like, we will have a 80% drop off second week. This is because the fan base is very interested and excited. They want to get the new book. Yes, you dropped your pen. So now you're going to come try to get the one in my hand. There you go. Yeah. That means that while we have a small fan base, we can still be a force in the market because of the hardcovers, which make just a lot more money than a paperback makes for the publisher. And this transition meant that novels became the dominant form for the genre through the 80s and 90s, until in the 90s, that's when Wheel of Time, Game of Thrones, Sword of Truth, the Farseer books, and lots of major fantasy epics launched with big hardcover sales, and kind of proved the genre capable of being a headlining genre. Because of that, you started to see people for the first time in sci-fi fantasy who were naturally novelists rather than naturally short stories writers getting published for the first time, and with their novels. And lo and behold, over the last 20 years, this has become more and more the standard. When I did it, it was still a little odd. Like, when I was trying to pitch books to people, had about half the editors say, go write short stories, prove yourself there, and then write novels, which was the wrong advice. But those were the old school editors who didn't realize the genre had changed on them already. And so half the others are like, yeah, I'll look at your novel. And I eventually sold a novel, Elantris, first, never having actually completed any short stories. No, I'd written Defending Elysium by then. I'll take that back. I had written one professional level short story, but it was still pretty long. So, if you like short stories, they can still be viable. Usually, the shorter the story, the less viable it is for you to make a living. If you wrote 10 2,000 word short stories. Generally, you would make more off of one 20,000 word novella than you would off of 10 2,000 word short stories, but it is still possible. There are still excellent magazines out there publishing short fiction and things like this. It's just that a novella you can theoretically sell for $3 on Amazon, where that gets into the sweet spot of how the royalties work. I won't bore you with all of that, but the long and short of it is, you should write what you love to write and try to break in that way. And if you have not read short stories and studied that art form, you are not going to write good short stories. And so you will be beating your head against the wall trying to break in that way, unless you want to start reading a lot of short stories, start practicing the form and getting good at it. Then you can still break in that way. I would say more people break in with novels than with short fiction these days. All right, we're going to move Jello. Yes, you have to move away because you are no longer my co-host. We are going to have Isaac, so we'll let Jello be wheeled away over here for a little bit.
And while Isaac is getting set up,
Yes.
we have a question from our good friend YouTuber Daniel Green.
Oh yeah.
So for those of you who like fantasy, you should check out his channel.
Yeah.
But he says, does Brandon have a favorite Star Trek show? And if so, why is it The Next Generation?
So here's the thing. Next Generation is, I do think, the best Star Trek show. But I like Deep Space Nine better. This is because even though the best episodes of all time in Star Trek are all Next Generation, in my opinion, the flute episode obviously being top of my list, like basically everyone else, but there are plenty of other fantastic episodes of Next Generation. And in many ways, it exemplifies Star Trek better because it takes the really interesting science fiction premise and does a self-contained story about it. I'm an epic fantasy writer and epic fantasy reader, and Deep Space Nine has an epic plot to the later part of Deep Space Nine. And I really liked how they handled having a continuing epic plot. I really liked Cisco. Obviously Picard is Picard, right? He's awesome. But I felt like I got to know Cisco better than I got to know Picard. He was more approachable. And I really enjoyed the continuing storyline that they did. And all the Worf stuff in Deep Space Nine just felt deeper and more lore interesting than it was in Next Generation. So, while I will admit Next Generation is the best, I am more fond of Deep Space Nine.
Cool.
Kara, we need another stack. And everybody, this is Isaac.
Hello.
So Isaac is my art director. Isaac is also Kara's husband. I met Isaac in 2006. No, 2005. 2005.
Yeah, really.
2005. 2005 when Isaac took my class.
Yeah. So what's also interesting there, though, is that we crossed paths at one point before that. It just didn't stick.
Yeah.
Because I was reading at the Leading Edge, and so I knew Peter and I knew Ben and a couple of these other guys because I would go to that. But I never saw you and didn't really interact with you there. So it took a while later for us to... but I knew there was this guy at the Leading Edge that everybody talked about who was writing books. And
yeah, Leading Edge is the science fiction magazine on campus at BYU, where I gained my first audience.
Yeah.
And Isaac took my class, and you're only 2 years younger than me, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm the same age as Jordo, I think.
Okay,
or maybe a little older.
And so Jordan's my brother. So Isaac came into class, and I'm like, everyone else, no one knew who I was then, right? So it was just another class.
Yeah.
It's not like it is now where it's hundreds of people and often taken by continuing education students and things like that. Back then, it was odd that there was somebody my age in the class.
Yeah, there was 20 people. Most of them were undergrads. I had already graduated. I had come back to school to go into optometry, and I wanted to take the science fiction writing class because I actually looked it up because I'd taken it from Dave Wolverton 2 years in a row back when I was in school, and I wondered, I wonder if he's still teaching, and he wasn't. This guy was. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so we became friends over the course of that class, and we were actually started going out to dinner. There was a group of us, and we go out to dinner afterward, and we were at the what's the restaurant?
Macaroni
Grill, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you were drawing on the table.
Yep. So they had the tablecloth there, and they give you crayons, and you can draw. And so I was doodling.
And Isaac is a professional illustrator. Why were you back at college to do optometry?
I didn't think I was looking. Well, the job that I was at, a lot of the work was going overseas. At the time, it was in 3D animation video production for education, and so I thought, oh boy, I thought I saw my job kind of going overseas, and so I needed maybe a backup plan.
Right.
So I quit my job in animation, and I came back to school for optometry because I had done this once before, coming to school into dentistry, and I had all these science credits, so I thought maybe I can do something with them.
Isaac has a family much like mine that encouraged him toward a real job. And instead of pursuing the arts like was our true dream.
Yeah.
And we both listened to them maybe a little too much at times.
Yes. It was in, so I'd come back, so the first time I went to school, I was doing a dental prep class where I had to go and watch a dentist pull wisdom teeth for 4 hours or something like that. It was part of the requisite for the class. And when the dentist had stepped out after I'd saw him sitting there prying teeth out of somebody's mouth, the dental assistant said to me, so you really want to do this, huh? I said, well, actually, I've been kind of thinking about animation. And she says, do that. Do that. So that got me thinking. And so I at the time, there wasn't really an animation program at BYU, but they had industrial design, which allowed you to work in 3D. So I went and I looked into that and got into that program.
And then I saw you drawing on the table.
Yeah. So I was drawing a face or something, and you said, oh, you're an artist. And I don't know how this had never come up before, but it hadn't.
Yeah.
I said, yeah. And Brandon said, you want to do the maps for my next book? It's called Mistborn. And you were in the process of finishing up the writing on that.
Yeah.
At the time, So I said, sure. But what Brandon didn't know was that all growing up, I had done fantasy maps for me. I'd done fantasy maps for my friends. So it was kind of a good fit. So yeah.
Yeah.
We went from there.
So you started doing maps, just kind of freelance for me.
Yeah.
And then eventually I hired Kara to run the warehouse and stuff like that. And you're like, oh man, I wish I could do something like that full time. Because you were not enjoying your job at that point.
No,
You were
I was working in video games with great people.
Yeah.
But it was.
You were animating sprites and people walking all day and
things like that. Yeah.
And so, by the way, guys, ask questions for Isaac. We're going to waste some time here, or not waste. We're going to chat a little bit, and then we'll have Adam throw some questions at Isaac. I'm just giving you a chance to start asking them. Yes, Jello. Jello is mad that he is no longer the co-host. You can hear him saying hello now. He might say Jello Bird for you. Yeah, and so I said, well, I think I could make that work. You want to come on full time? And
yes, I did.
and
it worked
so
out. Worked out well.
Oh, he's fine. He's fine, Adam.
We're getting people saying it's really loud.
Oh, is it really loud because the microphone is back there? Oh, I get it. I get it. So, sorry, Jello. You are going to be wheeled away. We will listen to the audience on that one.
This was this. I feel like it was a good fit for me because even when I was working in animation, I had survived several layoffs through that because I was really diverse. I wasn't the best animator, but I knew a lot of different skills, and that's kind of what I do here. Is I do a lot of it's art direction, but I do a lot of different things.
So if you see in any of our books a symbol of any sort, it's usually done by Isaac. So all the writing of the Mistborn symbols, all the I don't know if we have any back here, but in the steel alphabet he did. If you see a map, there's a decent chance it was Isaac. Sometimes he hires those out, but a lot of the maps Isaac does. He did Navani's sketchbook,
in the early
in
books.
the early books.
Yeah. Which
so-
is now done by Kelly Harris, who's a fantastic artist.
Yeah. He did our little Doom Slug, like our little. If you
Mhm.
see anything that's like a little chibi art, probably Isaac.
Me or maybe Sean Boyles.
Yep.
He's done a few for us.
That's true. Yeah. And so, but Isaac hires out anything that he doesn't feel like meets his skill set, and works with all the artists.
Yeah.
And he's in charge of the art direction for the leather bounds. So if you get a leather bound, you think, man, this is gorgeous. Well, that is Isaac's art direction and Peter's kind of layout and proofreading and stuff. Or-
Peter and I work
yeah.
on those together. A lot of the design is by me. Peter is very good at the layout and making sure that the words themselves look really great. And then we have Christy Gilbert, who we've brought on to help us with a lot of that stuff. And she's been great as well to work with.
So go ahead and throw some questions at Isaac, guys.
So the first one that I have is from Mark Lynn Burke.
Hey, Mark.
He wants to know when he gets to get your book. So if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Ah.
All right, so I have a book coming out. It is not set in the Cosmere or anything. Although I have thought about putting stars in the sky that look like Cosmere constellations, just to fool with people. But it is very cartoony. It's a book called Monsters Don't Wear Underpants, a Lift the Flap book. And it is going to be published by Familius in August of this year. So it follows the story of a little blue monster who does not want to wear underpants, and he runs through the neighborhood telling his mom which monsters do not wear underpants. By the end of the story, he is convinced to do the right thing, whatever that may be. So it's been a lot of fun to work on. I'm almost done with that. There's a lot of moving parts with the flip book. So lift the flap book.
Lift the flap book.
Yeah, but it'll be about this big. It's 8 by 8, about 24 pages, board book.
It's a board book.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
they took one look at me and they said, "Boy, if we're going to make this guy do a book, he needs one that's going to be drool proof."
So. There you go.
So yeah. So a funny thing with that is that there's this kind of running joke among some of our friends that your 6th book gets published. And so I've written epic fantasy, I wrote some middle grade fantasy books, I did a combination graphic novel thing, and none of these were getting picked up, and I didn't think about, this is my 6th book, I wrote this.
It is your 6th book.
It is. I wrote this book about underpants
So,
and monsters.
I sold my 6th book, Elantris, and Dan sold his 6th book, which
Yeah.
was I Am Not a Serial Killer. And so now Isaac gets to join the Sold Your 6th Book Club, except yours is about naked monsters.
Yeah, it's not an epic fantasy.
Is there going to be a new
Technically.
rule called the Rule of Six?
Yeah.
It sounds like a Sherlock Holmes novel.
Yeah,
The rule of 6.
the rule of 6. Yeah, Isaac's actually a pretty good writer. You could have sold like some of those, don't you think? It's
There were 2 of them that were so close that they just
just didn't end up.
acquisition. So one of those, or should I wait?
Says you're good now.
Okay. Good job, Adam, keeping track of this. We will figure these bugs out as we do more streams.
Learning curve.
Learning curve. But yeah.
Yeah. So the 2 middle grade fantasies were. I mean, I wrote them basically because I think you and Kara about the same time came to me and said, maybe you should try middle grade fantasy.
Yeah.
So I did.
And your humor really does match middle grade pretty well.
I thought that I was told anyway that the books had some fun parts in them, and one of the big problems I had early on, and maybe I still do, but is getting the tone right. I would go overboard on wacky, crazy, funny tone, and it just didn't quite work. And I think that I've figured out kind of what my style of book is. And for me, when I sit down to work on a project or a book, I say, okay, I kind of center myself on this style, and that's the Avatar: The Last Airbender style, which they can get into some serious things and in those stories, but there's always some kind of Sokka character who can say funny things or get into funny situations, but it's usually a side character. So.
Oh, that was a Jello bird back there. Kathy, we should probably have Emily come pick him up because there's not food and water on that thing, so he's at least going to need a drink. But maybe we just have Emily take him over to Xavieri if you guys can text her. So Jello will go back. Everyone can say goodbye. He did say Jello bird, but you can barely hear it. He's barely learned to say it. It's more like yes, right now than actual Jello bird. But hopefully he'll do better at that.
Yeah.
So other questions for
Yeah,
us?
so this next one is from Christopher Higgins. He says, how did you get involved with the Austin Ard novels?
Ooh.
So that's a fun story because when I was 13 or 14, my dad got a book in the mail. He got a package in the mail, and I was the one who always was grabbing the mail at the time, and I wondered what this was. It was from my aunt, and it felt like a book. And I wasn't really a reader at this point. I'd read a lot of books. The books I'd read were usually about huskies pulling sleds, or The Call of the Wild, that sort of a thing. I liked that sort of book, but it didn't really catch me. I opened my dad's birthday package before he did, and inside was a paperback of The Dragon Bone Chair by Tad Williams, and it had gorgeous cover art by Michael Whalen. And there was that moment there with the angels singing, and I just took the book and read it. Even though it was thick, it had an author's warning in the front, I had cool maps, had amazing art, and it just hooked me. That's what got me into fantasy at the time. And then I told my dad that I took his birthday present. So I still have that copy of the book, which is really awesome. When I heard that Tad Williams was going back to the Ostenard books, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I could do the maps for that? And so I randomly tweeted at him and said, hey, I do maps for Brandon Sanderson and these other authors. If you ever need a map for the Ostenard books, let me know. And then I kind of forgot about it. Anyway, I was out on a Pioneer Trek recreation in the middle of nowhere with no cell service, and I climbed to the top of a mountain with Kara, a hill, and I got cell service, and suddenly all these emails and tweets were coming in saying, we need you to do our maps for the Ostenard books. Ostenard. That's how Tad said them. So, I said yes because that's the series that got me into the books, or got me into reading. So that was pretty cool. That's how that happened, and I've enjoyed doing that. That's one of the projects that I continue to right now do outside of work, which I've had to kind of start limiting those quite a bit.
I think one of the most beautiful things you've ever done is the foil map for Ostenard.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know if we have any of those.
We do. Could we
want me to go
grab
grab one?
Yeah, could we grab one of
You
those?
can't buy these anymore, right?
No,
We still have a few
we
hanging
have a
around.
few left.
A few left for
Yep.
sale, or
Yeah.
Oh,
They're,
okay.
So they're on our site.
They're on our site. Okay.
And what we do is we split
with
split the proceeds with.
'Cause are we
Tad.
sold out of the Stormlight ones?
I
or-
believe we are.
Kara would have to say.
So
Yeah,
that's
we should have
another
to.
thing that if people want to get feedback on, we loved doing the Roshar foil map. If there's other foil maps, we'd be
Man.
interested in knowing what.
Yeah.
But
So
it's just it's one of my
yeah,
favorites.
so
too.
you get this out in the sunlight, which will melt it, but it also looks really cool before.
Yeah, they
it
use
melts.
wax to keep that foil on.
they use wax. It's pretty it's pretty robust, but if you were to take your fingernail and go across this,
Yeah.
it leaves some interesting things. Yeah, how's it looking over there? Is it
Just get a little bit different
get
reflection
a
on it so you can see
reflection on there?
It's
the map.
it is spectacular in
Oh,
person.
thank you, thank you.
The Stormlight one turned out really well, but I think the Ostenard one, like it has like that red
Yeah,
to it, and something about it just
yeah.
really looks gorgeous.
Yeah, that one was made to look a little more like the Middle Earth maps that
Yeah.
they did of
Mhm.
that same style.
Yeah.
So if anybody from the Wheel of Time is watching,
Oh, yeah.
I would totally make one of those for the Wheel of Time. I would make time for that.
But we know the people there. We could yeah.
I know.
But we
Yeah.
should see if Harriet wants to do a Wheel
yeah,
of Time.
that I would
Wheel.
totally do that.
Have you you haven't done a Wheel of Time map that you've done
No,
now?
I haven't.
We should talk to Harriet
Yeah.
about that.
That is the second.
I don't know if she
series that got
has
me into fantasy.
rights to that stuff anymore
I
with
don't know
with
either.
the television show also.
I
so.
don't know either.
But these foil maps, they are like Isaac said, they're a little persnickety. Is
Yeah.
that the right word?
Yeah. We
There.
just have to put warnings on them
Yeah.
so that people don't hang them by their radiator.
Yeah, if that wax melts, they start to ripple.
They rip
Yeah.
it off.
And some of the ones that we shipped out will ripple even in the mail, so we
Yeah.
have to have
Yeah, well,
extras to send
we
back.
actually the shipping thing we figured
You
out.
figured out
yeah,
so it doesn't
works
happen
really
anymore.
well.
Okay.
And, yeah,
But yeah, they are so pretty in person.
thank you.
So
Some people are curious about the video games you worked on.
Okay,
So
so
this is
some of
gonna
the
be
video
fun.
games I worked on. I worked on many that were never made. I did a bunch of story stuff on one that was called Space Station Tycoon. You can still look it up on YouTube. But we did like 13 episodes of cutscenes for that, Sean Boyles and I. And they were wacky and they were fun and we had a great time doing that. But that one didn't come out. But that was called Space Station Tycoon. One that I did one called Cloning Clyde. I did a lot of the level kind of layout and the art for that. I didn't design the levels. I designed what they looked like in the background using basic pieces that they gave me. That was when downloads for the Xbox were really big. Kingdom for Keflings was a big one. What was that?
Band of Bugs. Did you work on that?
Band of Bugs. I did all the animations on that. There was another one that I can't remember now that was very similar. There were a few small ones like that, but then some big ones. I did the animation system a couple of times on Twisted Metal for the PS3. That's the one where you've got clowns and things hanging out of the sides of cars and shooting at each other, and yeah. But I was only
Saga. Was that?
Oh yeah, Saga was a video game that I worked on. I did animations for that and symbols and.
I don't know if that's
some
still
other
going,
things.
but
I don't know.
it was a thing for a while.
Kind of a cool fantasy thing for a while, and then I also did some stuff on Disney Infinity. The place I worked was contracted by Avalanche or Disney Interactive, whatever they were at the
Your
time.
topiary.
Yeah, so go and look up the Disney Infinity trailer. Look at those, and there's one where they're going through all these things that you can put in the game, and then they pause on the moose topiary for comedic effect. And I did the moose topiary. that was near the end when they were having us model very simple things, but it was really way below my pay grade. But
You were doing like particle effects on something, weren't you? At some point? No.
After Effects.
Yeah.
I was putting together After Effects things, but yeah. So those are some of the games that I worked on.
Others have asked what the hardest decision you've had to make as an art director is.
Oh boy, the hardest decision. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you a hard decision that we had to make was with the Warbreaker end papers. Dan Dos Santos gave us like 6 different versions, 6 different sketches, and they were all gorgeous. And we had to make a decision based on that. And some of them were better pieces of art if you were to just hang them in an art gallery, and some of them worked better for the book. And we chose what worked better for the book, which are still gorgeous. But there were some there that I think would have made really great just pieces of art on their own. So that was a hard decision.
That's always hard, right?
Yeah.
Like when we get the sketches from the artists saying, "Here are the 5 cool things I could do," and you're like, "I want you to do all of these," but we don't have space for all of them.
Most of the time, everything they send is great, and it makes it really difficult to decide on that. So I'd have to think about if there was like a heavy, difficult decision. But usually it's the everyday, good or better pieces of art.
From Clarity Art 1, they say, Isaac, how do you and Ben McSweeney collaborate on making illustrations for the Stormlight books? Does Brandon give you the ideas first, or do you both come up with your own concepts for the art?
We're starting to settle into a way that this works with Ben, me, and Brandon. And it's usually that Brandon will say, "Okay, Isaac, this is what I'm thinking about for the book. I want to have this many pieces of plants, this many pieces of animals, whatever it may be, right?" And he'll oftentimes tell me what those things are. I'll give descriptions to Ben McSweeney. If there aren't descriptions, then we'll say, "Ben, we're kind of thinking we need something like this." And then he has a lot more leeway on those particular items. So right now I'm not going to say specifically what we're working on.
You can. It's fine.
Okay, we're working on some spren pieces that Ben has been drawing different kinds of spren. and
Basically, how all the Radiant Spren look in Shadesmar,
Mhm.
and in the physical realm.
and in the physical realm.
Yeah,
and
that's
so,
what Shalon's going to be sketching for us in the next book.
And there's been some things where Brandon has told us this is what it's like, but he doesn't say what the clothing is like. And so Ben will go on his experience of what he's read in the books, and he'll come up with something, and then we say yay or nay. And in most of the times, we will go with some variation of what Ben has done. And on these latest ones, there's only been one that we've really had to go back on and say, give us another concept.
Yeah.
But that just speaks to how good Ben is.
Yeah, he's
what
really
he
in
does.
tune with these books.
He is.
I usually have an idea of what I want Ben to do,
Yeah.
and you usually have like just some leeway to do the things you want to do.
Yeah.
Like if we go to Oathbringer, like I would have said, hey, here's the couple things I'm planning for Ben. He does the bulk of the art. He does the Swan sketchbook pages.
Yeah.
But then Isaac came back and said, I think I want to do the wines, this thing with the wines,
Right.
or I want to do this thing with the how you write glyphs.
Right. That was in there because of that. Mythica, I think, I don't remember if you or I came up with that idea, but I read the book, and then I just make notes, and then I come to Brandon and I say, these are the ones you want. Here's some other ideas. What do you think is good for fleshing things out for this book?
We have never found a place for the 10 Fools, have we?
No, we haven't.
So we bumped that one from Words of Radiance to Oathbringer, and
now,
still haven't done it.
Yeah, we
yet.
don't know if it'll even be in this book either. But eventually we'll get there, maybe. But I'm at the beginning of that process for Stormlight 4.
Yep.
I can tell you that we will have a second page of glyphs from Naz.
Good old Naz.
From his time in the Ardentia.
So, if you guys don't know who Naz is the person who annotates all the maps and pieces of art in the Stormlight books. The affectation is that the Ars Arcanum for the books and a lot of the illustrations are things that have been collected by or put together by Chris and how would you describe Naz as?
Well, he's Grumpy James Bond.
Grumpy James Bond, who's sent into the worlds to grab artifacts for Chris when she's putting together kind of her guide to a world in the Cosmere.
I've discovered a lot more about Naz in the last year just because we're getting closer to including him in more things. And right now, his personality is Grumpy James Bond because he goes on missions. He's kind of a grump. But he kind of likes that sort of thing. He likes going off on his own, figuring out ways to do things. But he has a specific skill set that works really well for this sort of thing.
But things kind of go poorly for him most of the time.
Yeah. I wouldn't say he's a Mr. Bean type character, but if you imagine the situations that he gets into, they're those sorts of things, but usually not funny, though he may tell them in a grumpy, funny way later on.
Basically, Naz, as Hoyd is to me, Naz is to Isaac.
Yep.
And this is very fun because he can write all these annotations on the artwork, and you'll see Naz popping up in the books now and then, just as cameo references to this guy. The affectation is the text of the book, like The Way of Kings or one of these, is not something they have in world, but all of the art in the Ars Arcanum they do, and those are produced by Chris and Naz.
Right.
So we'll find someone to give this to. If you're wondering why I do this, the pen runs out on a page at some point, and I don't get a full signature on that, so I give those to Kara, and she finds someone to give those to somehow. We are thinking we might save them and give them away on one of these streams, just like by doing like a giveaway or something, just like, whatever. But we're not doing it on this one because we don't have it set up to do it on this one. But we'll save those. We'll give those away eventually. Though Jello ate the last pen, so.
Do I get a pen?
Do you want a pen?
To eat.
To eat?
What is the process for you to create a symbol or map for a book?
So both of those have a very kind of a different process. If you look at the overview, the process is the same, and the process is the same process that a lot of times is used for plotting a book, where you start macro and then you kind of go down to the micro level. But so I'll talk about each of those separately. For a symbol, it's usually Brandon coming to me and saying, we need a symbol for this series, or I realize we need a symbol for this series. Let's say like the Nalthus one. We just came up with that. We put it on the spine of the Warbreaker leather bound. There's one right here.
Yeah. Tears of Eggley is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we said, what we don't have a symbol for Nalthus. What do we want that to be? And I talked to Brandon, and we said, well, maybe a symbol of the tears of, how do you say it?
Eggley.
Edgley.
Yeah.
Okay, so the tears of Edgley. And so we talk about, okay, what are the tears of Edgley? What do we know that's canonical? What do you have in your head? And we kind of came up with a story about them, and then I just start drawing.
So if you don't know what these are, the tears of Eggley are flowers that they get a specific dye for that are briefly mentioned in the books. But they are where the shard pool is in Warbreaker, so it's actually pretty relevant, even though in the first book it doesn't actually pop up that much.
Yeah, I think it's mentioned that they use them for particular
But they
dyes.
are invested flowers,
Yeah,
basically.
So we thought that would be a good symbol for the world of Nalthus, is to take one of its investitures and make that into a symbol. So I draw a bunch of flowers at this point, and we say, what looks cool? What is going to be symbolic? And so on this, you can see there's a 5. I don't know if that's clear, but that's right there. It's also on my Instagram. It might be on Brandon's Instagram as well, if you want to see it up closer. But we have a 2-tone here, 5 lobes sticking up, 5 lobes sticking down. There are references to the number 5 in this book that have different meanings, like the 5, were they called scholars? The 5 scholars, and there was 5 something else. And anyway, so you'll see that one is sticking up and one is sticking down, and there's more symbolism in that as well. But I do a bunch of symbols. I show them to Brandon, and I say, okay, which ones of these do you like? What don't you like? And then we narrow it down, and then I iterate on that, and I do another version where we get a little bit closer. And once we get it close, in the sketch realm, I take it into Illustrator, make some nice vectors so that it can print up really well on the foil, or as we're doing decals or different things like that. Another thing that I have in the back of my mind when I'm making symbols is that I want them to be cool. Because we've noticed, and this was not something I noticed early on, but I noticed people they'll want to get stickers and put them on their laptops, or they'll want to get them tattooed. And if somebody's going to do something permanent like that, I want them to be cool. So that's something that's always in the back of my head, is this has got to look cool in case somebody wants to tattoo it on themselves. I don't want to be responsible for something dumb.
It's a good rule.
Someone's gonna tattoo your monster from Monster Somewhere Underpants on them.
It will.
So
Be.
I made him look cool.
If you are really interested in how these things iterate, the plan is for the tour for Stormlight 4 for Isaac to go along with me and to bring a slideshow presentation of initial concepts and things like that, and then final art as they ended up in the book and things like that.
Yeah, well, I'll try to come up with something that's intriguing and fun, and I probably won't bring a guitar and sing about them, but who knows? Maybe I will.
Isaac was in a rock band when I met him.
Control Z.
Yep.
Anyway.
As everyone frantically YouTube's Control Z.
Yeah, with hits like Grandpa Was a Ninja and Robo Nerd.
Those are 2 separate songs.
2 separate songs.
Yes. Grandpa was not both a ninja and a robo.
Right. We also have one about Grandma, which was Death Wish Grandma.
I remember the Betrayal song. What was that one?
Betrayal
the
song.
song that you sang when your girlfriend broke up with you and you were just like really angry.
No, so that one was for we did that for Space Station Tycoon.
Oh, you did the song for that?
Yeah, that
okay.
was called and I don't know if how much trouble I would get in streaming it.
Yeah.
Because Namco Bandai owns the rights to that, and so I wrote this song. We had some friends of ours sing it and orchestrate it, and but it's called "I Will Love You Forever." With a love that knives can't sever. It just goes on from there, you know. But it's about the love between a space monkey and a squid. It's just really bizarre. But that had
That's
kind of
the one.
that.
Okay.
That's the one you were thinking of.
That's
with,
the one I was thinking of.
with the backstabber.
Yep.
Yeah. So we did these crazy songs. Maybe someday we'll release them. Although I am on a podcast that'll come out here soon, where we did play some of the Control Z
Oh, did
songs.
ya?
We played Barbecution and Sidekick Secretary. Sidekick Secretary is about Superman's secretary. And I wrote that a while ago, and it's kind of funny because for a while I was Brandon's secretary, and I was a sidekick secretary.
He did Adam's job before we
Yeah, for a
hired
while.
Adam. So you're executive assistants.
Yeah, executive assistant.
Though
So-
Adam's kind of morphed into publicist and marketing manager,
Yeah.
but he still has
Do
to
whatever.
do whatever. Yeah.
we wear a lot of hats here.
Yeah.
You're, I would say, just as your friend, one thing I've seen is that one of the big challenges in your life is you are multi-talented and multi-interested. You are an artist, a musician, a writer, and that's not even scratching the surface of all the things you are interested in doing.
I probably should have written musicals or something like that.
Well, when we do, what is that one that Ben came up with in the
A hero for all ages.
A Hero for All Ages?
Yeah.
In the Mistborn era too, broadsheets.
Yeah.
He came up with the idea of a musical based on Vin and Ellen's experiences, and he put that one in and came up with it all on his own.
If we ever see the Nikki Savage stories, they're one of the actors who played Vin shows up on stage. So,
Right.
Yeah.
If you
kinda
want to
fun.
read some of Isaac's writing, he wrote the Nikki Savage story in the broadsheets for the most.
Yeah. So the broadsheets and Shadows of Self.
Yeah.
And the broadsheets for Bands of Mourning were probably 95% me.
Yeah,
If
I
you
wrote
wanna
the
see-
Alamancer Jack one in the first one.
in the first one.
And
yeah.
then the second one is Alamancer Jack also, but you
But I
wrote
wrote
it.
that one.
And then you wrote Nikki Savage,
Nikki
which
Savage,
is
yeah.
Alamancer Jack's protege.
Mm-hmm.
And we still kind of want to do a Nikki Savage novel
Yeah.
at some point. Isaac wants to do. You will eventually. And Isaac is one of the only people on the planet. Like I'm happy doing collaborations on non-Cosmere stuff with my other writer friends, but the Cosmere is so intricate that you just most people could not write in it.
Yeah.
We don't think. Like we even had trouble with the White Sand graphic novel. We had a fantastic writer on that, but just weren't steeped in the Cosmere in the way they needed to be. And so if there's ever writing to be done in the Cosmere that I can't do, it's probably going to be Isaac if he wants to.
And it'll go through all the same processes to make sure that it's canonical, and
Right.
we'll make sure that it's
Yeah, and
good.
you'll know. Have we talked about the children's book?
I think we can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we announced it. Wait.
Right.
Did we?
If you have, we can talk
Yeah, we
about
can
it.
talk
I'm
about
not big on secrets.
Yeah.
So the publisher who's doing Isaac's Monsters Don't Wear Underpants book came to us and said, "Hey, we really like this story in Oathbringer of the girl who looked up," and they said, "We think this would make a nice children's book."
Yeah.
Isaac knows way more about children's books than I do. And he suggested, it needs some revisions to actually work as a children's book. And I suggested some revisions, and he's like, these probably aren't actually going to work for the children's book. And he suggested some revisions, which did work. And so I just said, Isaac, you just take it over. And so it's going to be co-authored by us. Probably the first thing it's officially co-authored, except
Right,
we did
yeah.
get the Nikki Savage story and the other
Yeah.
thing. But theoretically, we will sometime in, it's still years away, but we'll have a picture book of the girl who looked up that takes my writing from the book. Isaac adapts it so it works as a children's book.
Yeah.
And then art directs Familia's hiring out to get the that work done.
Yep.
So that'll be the first thing you can actually buy from the both of us.
Probably. Yeah. So
Mhm.
that's. Yeah. I think we're looking, and it may have been in the state of the Sanderson at sometime in 2021. It really
Yeah.
depends on when the art and when the writing comes together.
Yeah.
But we're in the middle of that process right now.
I've warned Isaac that book 4 has a really good one that'll work
Yeah.
pretty well as well. You haven't read that one yet.
I haven't,
No,
but I'm
yeah.
excited to.
Yeah, so
We're prepping.
yeah.
So my other question is, how many people want a board book about the stick?
I've seen many people wonder if Stick is going to get its own book.
Mhm.
So I think it would be a very boring book.
See, I could see I love the Terry Pratchett "Where's My Cow" book. If you guys don't know, it's a Terry Pratchett children's book that they talk about in world. Then they made them, and fans made a version of that is a riff on it. That's "Where's My Chol."
That's right. Yeah, I've seen that.
Fans gave that to us.
I did not realize that was based on a Terry
Yeah,
Pratchett thing.
it's based on a Terry Pratchett thing.
Yeah,
It would be fun to do a like you get the little animal books that's got like chickens and things.
Right.
A little board book of all the creatures that Hoyt is fond of calling gross and disgusting.
A is for Axeham, C is for Chol.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. The audience for that would be so small, right? That everyone watching is like, yes, please, but you're the only people who would buy it, and probably only a few of you. So I could see us doing that for fun at some point, but that would.
Right. Yeah.
That would be among the more goofy products that we come up with.
Maybe that's like maybe something like that as a Kickstarter goodie at some point, like way down the road.
Maybe for like the Oathbringer. Well, I mean, if we're gonna make it, we want to have it, right?
Yeah, like the Words of Radiance, we could have the stick board book. Yeah, I got the look.
I don't think. Yeah, you're gonna. You convince them that it's cool. I suppose.
There's sometimes I totally get off town. It still happens. I got people to rein me in, so that's good.
So this one from Soul Sniper Productions regarding your multi-talentedness.
Okay.
Says, do you ever feel the struggle of wanting to make a project and due to the fact that you are multi-talented, you want to do all of it or at least be involved in all aspects of the project?
So, yeah, there's a tendency, like there's feature creep that you hear about in software. There's a tendency that I will creep into whatever I have opinions on, and I have to let myself go back on that. Like this Kickstarter that we have coming up, I want to take it over and organize it
and do all the art yourself.
Do all the art and stuff, and I can't. I need to lean on the people who are better at that than I am. So I'm getting better at just letting other people do their things on stuff and letting them be creative in it and letting me be okay with that, because people are specialized and can do way better. You know what I mean? So I'm happy to give feedback on those sorts of things. One of the things that got me to the idea that it's okay to just let go is that I have a bunch of my own projects that I want to do. These are things like the Nikki Savage stories and comics and stuff that Brandon and I have talked about that just really sing to me. And if I am spending all of my time I don't know, creating this or that thing that I think is cool, but maybe not as cool as the stories, that I'm never going to get to the stories. And so I've been getting to a point where I'm trying to bring more people in and share the love on projects. And so at some point, and I don't know if this is the time for that, but at some point I love working with fans who are also professionals.
Mm-hmm.
At some point we may send out a tweet or something that says, hey, who are the professionals who love Brandon's books who work in comics, or whatever it may be?
Yeah.
Please get a hold of us. I'm not doing that right now because I don't know if my inbox can handle that, but at some point down the road we may have things like that, because we like collaborating with talented people who know Brandon's works. We get really good work from them.
Speaking on this whole, like, the things that you want to do or whatnot, like, I remember freshman year in college, something that has always stuck with me that changed the way I see the world, and it was an economic principle. And this is, and I'm going to get this wrong, economists, I'm sorry, I'm going to give the layman's version of it. There is a principle of opportunity cost that I didn't understand. I thought I understood opportunity cost, right? It makes a lot of sense. You're like, I can do this or this. Doing this costs this. But what they showed in this class was that they had this metaphor, this like system where They said, let's say there are two products that you can make that you're really good at making. You can make straw hats or you can make straw baskets, right? And you are pretty good at both of them. And you can make 10 straw hats in an hour, or you can make, like 7 straw baskets. And there's someone else you could hire, and they can only make 3 straw hats in an hour, or they can make 6 straw baskets. So they are worse at both than you are, less efficient at both of them than you are. And this is where I'm not sure if I'll get to write the numbers, but if you run the numbers, you would think that, well, what I should do then is I should spend half of my time making straw hats and half of my time making straw baskets, and because I'm better at both of them, or more efficient at both of them, than this other person. But if you actually run the numbers, it is because you are so much better at making straw hats than baskets than someone else, and you have an exceptional skill in this, even though you're really good at this other one, hiring someone who is less efficient to do it and trading for theirs and spending your time only on the thing at which you are the most efficient actually ends up with both of you doing better. You end up making more hats and having more baskets after trading than you would have if you did half and half. And so maybe someone can actually find the real numbers on that. I'm not sure if the numbers I just spitballed work, but it's a real economic principle where you realize that even if you're better at both things, or at least more efficient at both things than someone else, spending your time on the thing that is most valuable to you, and not spending half of it on this other thing that is still valuable but not as valuable, you end up in the end being better off by doing that. And it gets really complicated when it's more about your desire than about your efficiency, but I think the same sort of thing applies.
Right.
That even if someone is less efficient, if someone, like, it's harder for someone, I would say you are the best person to make any given piece of Cosmere art because you just know the Cosmere better. It's going to take more work for someone else than it would take for you, but
from the lore side.
From the lore side of things and continuity side of things, but we can give them a continuity guide, and they can spend a little more time than you would have to spend because they have to bring themselves up to speed, and we will still be better off if you do the things you are most passionate and interested in than if we had you divide your time and do half and half.
That's an interesting
One
thing.
of our viewers is a PhD in economics, Taylor Smith. Thank you. He says you're talking about the difference in absolute advantage and comparative advantage, and he said your explanation was great.
Good.
Cool.
Thank you. I love economics. Just love it. I think it's so fascinating and so interesting. And it's one of those things that I love when there's a math or a science that has some real interesting layman principles behind it, rather than just the numbers. It's, you can tell the things that I love out of history and physics are not the numbers, but they are what those numbers mean. And so,
conceptual stuff.
this just stuck with me all the years. It's kind of been a guiding principle for me, is spend my time on the thing that is most valuable, even if, like, it's hard for me because I am also one of these people. I know the Cosmere better than anyone else, right? Except with the exception of maybe Karen, who keeps the wiki. But I know what I want the Cosmere to be better than anyone else. I know what I want every book to be better than anyone else. But if I can take the thing that I'm the best at, which are the most valuable to me, which is the Cosmere, and some of these other ideas, work with someone else, like Mary Robinette and I have a story coming out very soon. Should be end of the month, I think, is what Max was saying for the audiobook launch of that, where I could bring Mary in, and it would have been very hard to bring her in on a Cosmere, and less hard to bring in on this other wacky story that was really cool, that was kind of distracting me. And she has done just an amazing job on that story.
She's an incredible
and
writer.
we are better off, everyone's better off, that I was able to work on Stormlight 4. And the story that I really wanted to have written that was itching at me is now written. And I feel like it's actually better than it would have been if I would have written it on my own, because it was a story where I could find somebody who could add something that I couldn't have added to that particular thing. And so it's just, that one's been a slam dunk. You guys are gonna love that story. Even though Will Smith made a movie basically that had the same
Very
premise,
similar.
his movie was apparently bad. I didn't see it, but it got bad reviews. How about that? And ours is good.
So this is a similar process that I go through in art direction,
Mhm.
actually. Now that you mention it, so you know your stories and things, right? You've got this. You're kind of being a writing director in that way. You're
Yeah.
collaborating with them, right?
Mhm.
And that's what I do with, like, when we're doing the heralds or something. I bring in your knowledge of the Cosmere. I bring in my knowledge of the Cosmere and the lore, and my knowledge of art, and then I work with somebody who is a way better painter than me. But we get something that altogether working on it is better than the sum of its parts, if that makes any sense at all. I don't know if it's kind of like that. I'm seeing a little bit of a correlation there.
Have we shown it people Taln yet? Do you want to go grab Taln and show them?
Do you want this to be the reveal for Tom?
I mean, it's just going to be on YouTube, so
Yeah.
it's not like an actual real good high
yeah, I can go get Tom.
Go get Taln.
I can go get Tom.
So Taln is so the heralds. Like I said, we want these kind of Sistine Chapel type paintings of the 10 heralds for in-world to make as our end pages. And you got 4 of them in Oathbringer, but there's 10 heralds. So we've been working slowly over time, just collecting pictures from people we really want to work with, that we think would do really good jobs. And we started on these pretty early because we wanted to find when people had openings in their schedule of just artists we wanted to work with. And it was earlier last year, it was almost a year now, I think, that we got Taln in, and it is gorgeous. And we've got the actual physical painting, because with these we're buying them all, the physical painting, if they'll sell them. Dan Dos Santos won't sell us his yet. He likes them too much, which we will not push him on that. But we have Jezrin, and we have Vev upstairs, and so yeah, we've got the Taln painting that Isaac's going to grab from you, and he'll do the reveal of who did that and things like that. But it is one of the best fantasy science fiction artists of all time.
Nick Cheese wants to know if Talon's dress is transparent too.
Talon's dress is not as transparent as Ash's dress was. But good question. Very good question.
So yeah, that was funny. A lot of people are saying get your screenshots ready. So
Yeah, get your screenshots ready. We'll post a high-res version eventually, but this will be for Rhythm of War, if indeed that is the title. I guess we haven't officially announced it yet, but it's the title. You want to throw any short little
let's
questions?
see if I can get
while
you.
We're waiting?
Well, I guess that will depend on you.
Yes.
I will try and get you.
Oh yes.
This one from Instagram from Aspiny Rose
Mhm.
says, which order of the Radiance would you be in?
So I would most likely be just who I am is Bondsmith, but that is hard to say because there's only 3 Bondsmiths, and I guess I get to say because I am the creator of it all, but that is very much my personality, and so that's a good match for me.
And I hear Isaac coming, so
Yeah.
I won't ask you another one. Well, here's a quick one from Twitter from T. Kate Thorpe. Would you like to one day own a Black Lotus?
I do own a Black Lotus, so yes, I need to get a beta because I only have it unlimited, or an alpha. I want a Black Bordered Lotus, and I'm gonna have to shell out for that eventually. I just haven't gotten around to it.
You
But
have a nice little hand-painted one, too.
I do have a hand-painted Lotus that Christopher Rush made for me before he passed away. He was a fan, and he hand-painted one on a collector's edition Lotus for me. All right, so here we go.
All right.
So tell us about this. So
How much of that is in there? How far back do I need
I'll
to
hold
go?
it. And then you can
We're
talk
getting a
about
lot of reflection on it, so maybe tilt it up. Yep, just like that.
Okay, I can hold it.
it. You got it?
So this is Tom. This will be one of our end papers at some point for one of the books.
probably the next one.
Probably this one.
Yeah, but it might not be.
It might not be.
Possibly,
I've hired out for the rest of them, and
Yeah.
so it just depends on what fits the tone of the book.
Yeah.
But this is by Donato, and Donato has been amazing to work with. You've probably seen his stuff from The Lord of the Rings. He's done stuff for George Martin. He's done space stuff.
I have always wanted to own a Donato. He actually did an art piece for us very early in my career for a short story, but it was digital only,
Yeah.
so I couldn't buy it.
The process on this was I have these briefs that I not those kind of briefs. We have these briefs that I write up about each of the heralds. I go into our wiki. I pull out the lore, things that haven't been revealed. I put it all together, and I send out what I'm allowed to the artist, which is usually most of it.
Yeah.
And then I say the whole thing about these are kind of like the Sistine Chapel paintings of all the apostles or things like that. These are something from the Renaissance of this world where they have done Vorin representations of the 10 heralds. So on this one, I sent him Talm. And we know that Talm, especially we know this from Oathbringer, Talm is the one who held the darkness back. He held the desolations at bay for how long? Thousands of years? Something like that. And so what we have here, Donato interpreted that as a Talm stepping forth out of damnation with this kind of representation of damnation in the background. I don't know, what else can I say about this? Some of the things that he incorporated in here, he used our symbols for the stone wards. Is he the stone ward one? Yeah. We've got some of those in this. There are numbers so the stone wards are number 9. So we've got the Vorin numeral 9 in there. The sword, he took that from descriptions of the sword where it's kind of this molten nail, this large molten nail. Anyway, we're just happy with how this turned out. He only did one revision on it for us because we didn't need. We didn't
right
need
off.
more.
Can we get close, maybe setting it on the table?
Yeah.
Because other people would like to.
How close? Do you want me to wait?
Probably in the middle of the sheet.
Okay.
Nope, that's going to be, well,
How's that?
yep, just like that. No, it's a little.
Well, we'll do an official reveal at some
There
point.
it is. Yeah.
This
Just
is
a little
just your
far back for
teaser.
detail.
This is your teaser.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Very cool.
We were so happy when that came in. Maybe eventually we'll have all 10. Once Dan decides that he can let go.
Yep. That's all.
I think we asked him
good.
to put it in his will if all else fails.
Yes,
Right.
there you go. So at least Joel will have it.
There we
Right.
go.
Dan Dos Santos is like a super healthy guy who eats really well and exercises a lot, and
He's gonna
it's like
outlast all
he's
of
gonna
us.
outlast all of us. He's like very in tune with himself, and like he meditates and stuff. Like he is just the man. So
Dan is great.
yeah, the world would be a better place if all people were like Dan Dos
I
Santos.
completely agree.
So
Completely agree. So yeah, anyway, that's kind of the process there where we bring in our lore knowledge and knowledge of art direction and all these things, and we try to come up with something all together.
Mhm.
But in the end, really, the artist just
you got
somebody like Donato.
sketches in for one just recently, right?
Yeah, I just got sketches for Harold Paelia,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
who I don't know what we've said about her in the
Yeah.
past, but she's the herald who is over the Order of the Truth Watchers.
Mm-hmm.
So her symbol is the one on the chart at the front of the Way of Kings that is green. It's emerald. It looks like flowing grass. And so the herald, there's some beautiful things going on with nature in the background with this one.
And if you're like, who are all these people, Brandon? They are mostly going to be in the back 5 Stormlight books. But yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, art direction and stuff.
So another question for Isaac, if you're good to go, or
Yeah,
good
you
for a
can-
little while longer. Yeah.
Whenever you want to take off, you can.
I'm actually just like Brandon's working on this book. I'm working on the book upstairs right now, trying to get.
Yeah, because we have to
Get
submit
things
it
ready.
basically
Yeah.
today. So
So maybe I'll stick around till 4 or something. Like
Okay.
that.
Cool.
That's another 14 minutes.
Yep.
Okay.
This one is
Good
from
time.
Z3DT. And the question is, what is a piece of art that you've made for the Cosmere that you like, but that was never used and likely never will?
Do we have something like that?
That you did?
that we haven't used. I have tons of little sketches and things of symbols that we
Yeah, there are a
we
lot
didn't
that
do.
would count.
Yeah, that would count. And I don't know if I have a favorite in there, but I can tell a story about when we were doing the Cosmere symbol, because we did a ton of different ideas with that. And for a while there, I think I was so when we do symbols, I will sometimes, I have these books full of symbols. I want to find something iconic, so I'll immerse myself in symbology for a while. And I was kind of thinking, wouldn't it be cool if we haven't used something with a hand? And so I was coming up with these stylized hands for a while that had different things on them. But the logo, it was just getting too complex, and it wasn't falling together all that well. But I have these cool drawings of symbolic hands. It was kind of like the Hamza, I think, is one of the things in our world that is very similar to that. Kind of drawing on that sort of iconography, the way that Robert Jordan drew on the wheel and the worm Ouroboros and things like that.
So how many of these do we have left? Start counting that one. Where are we? There's 4 over there, so this is
Yeah,
5.
This is number 5.
All right, so we passed.
We're more than halfway.
Yeah, we're more than halfway. So.
Halfway of what's left.
Of the last, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So we're all we have less than a third left, right? So
cool. But I can't think of anything else.
those notebooks are cool. Haven't you auctioned one of those off before? Or no?
I had a private collector bought a bunch of my
bought
old,
them, yeah.
like all the stuff that I did for the Mistborn books. And
Right,
things
with
like
all the Inquisitor spikes.
Yeah,
and-
yeah.
including the very first Vin fan art.
The very
Yeah.
first Vin fan art and Inquisitor fan art and Kelsier fan art was done by me, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
I can.
You have to
I
have
can,
been.
Yeah, I have to.
because
Have
you
been.
got the book before.
But what's cool is the other day I was going through some of this. It was on the Crafty Dice stream. They wanted me to come on and talk about the symbols, and I brought up some of these old drawings. And my Vin, while is not as good as a lot of people's Vins, you can just tell that it's Vin. There's something to be said for how iconic of a hero she is. That they're just the description is very clear, and this is what you get when you draw Vin. So even mine looks like a Vin from back then. I did find in my books too, I found very chibi Inquisitors that I thought would be funny if we did this Hello Kitty style Inquisitor.
Oh yeah, that was a while ago that you wanted
Yeah.
Hello Inquisitor.
Yeah, it said like Yo Inquisitor or something like that with this little, we never did that.
So, Mackenzie Bits, this is a question for both of you. They're just looking for what your average day looks like.
I want to start with mine.
Yeah.
My average day is I wish I had more of a schedule, but it's like get up with the kids and with Kara, and we get them all ready for school, and then we take them to school, and I get into work about 9:20.
Because they go to the school across the street.
Yeah, they go to the school that's near work, which is really nice and convenient for us. So, and then I take a look at what is most pressing. I usually know this before I get to work because there's rarely any fires that need to be put out immediately. But so right now it would be the Way of Kings Leatherbound. I look at what I need to do and I jump into it. Sometimes it's doing email though. There's a lot of projects that I have going up in the air, like when you're juggling, right? I have to throw one ball up in the air while I'm catching another one. So I try to get feedback to artists as soon as I can during the day, but I have to balance that with, do I need to get this book out the door, for example? Well, then the artist can wait another day for the feedback. But I try to keep each artist is a ball. I'm trying to get feedback back to them as quickly as I can, or to the comic letterer or the comic colorist or the one who's doing the pencils or whatever. All of these people, I'm just trying to keep them going, to keep the machine going toward getting the books done. I am art director, but I'm part project manager on a lot of things too, because I have to figure out deadlines and try to just move everything toward completion. So I do that. I normally if I have to do any artwork where it's just grinding, like just drawing or inking or things that they take just the creative part of the brain, but I've already made a lot of the decisions earlier on. I save that for the afternoon when I'm a little more fatigued, because I can sit and draw and listen to an audiobook or music a lot easier than if I need to actually come up with the design itself, and I'm researching things and the wheels are cranking. That works. My wheels cranking work a lot better right after I've woken up, and like the 4 or 5 hours after I've woken up. So, and then I stop 5:36. Theoretically, Kara is over here probably thinking, yeah, when does he really? But I stop 5:36, and then I just go hang out with my family, and oftentimes fall asleep somewhere that is not my bed. So that's my day.
I get up at noon-ish. I talked about this on the previous stream. And I, 2 days a week, go to the gym. 4 days a week, I'm writing. 1 day a week, I'm doing all the stuff that is not writing. So on the writing days, I will write from 1 until 5. I will go take a shower at 5, hang out with family from 5 until 9 or 10. Go back to work at around 10, work until 2, and then have from 2 until 4 off. Do whatever I feel like doing. Last night I was watching LSV draft some Powered Cube from his Twitch stream from now like a month and a half ago or something like that. I am not don't have a lot of time to keep up on those things. So, but on Thursdays are different for me. Thursdays are my now everybody else gets to make me do stuff that I've been putting off, and so it involves loads of phone calls with various people who need. So, Adam, do we think that this is like bandwidth stuff, or is it just that my phone
It's
is
probably just your phone because
Probably
yours is
just
the
my
only one that's dropping.
Yeah, and so we probably just have to use a different phone next time. For whatever reason, my phone is not great for streaming to YouTube. So sorry, YouTube. It's my phone. So we'll steal someone else's phone next time.
So probably the last question for you, Isaac, is if you're going at 4. Many people are wondering if we're ever going to see a Cosmere coloring book.
We've talked about this.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's within the realm of possibility, but I don't want to promise anything at this point, because again, it comes down to this whole opportunity cost thing and where do we want to spend our time. But I could see it happening. I just don't know when.
Yeah. I mean, we want to eventually do some world books for some of the series, right? Like a nice world guide for Roshar, but those take a lot of effort, and we have seen some of those turn out very poorly for other worlds and book series, and so we're not sure when and if we will do that.
Yeah, we would have to be. We've learned, especially in Cosmere things, that we need to be heavily involved.
Yep.
On those sorts of things, or things can kind of move away from where we want it. So we would have to be involved with this. So it would need to be during a time when we're not preparing for like a Stormlight book, because that takes our that's highest priority.
Yep.
I guess a related question is maybe not a coloring book, but how about a Cosmere art book?
Yeah. Well, that's what I was just talking
sorry,
about.
I was reading.
Yep.
Yeah, same kind of deal on that.
Yep. I would imagine that we will, if we release a Cosmere art book, it will be after book 5.
Yeah, that's what we've been telling people, is that we're probably not even going to think about it until after book 5 is out the door. All right, anything else for me?
Nope, I don't think so.
Off you
right,
go,
thank
Isaac.
you.
Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you all.
Now you're back to just me and my long-winded
Yep,
stories.
and we're getting spammed in the comments again.
Oh, yeah?
A bot.
By a bot.
So I have Mark Lindbergh on it.
Mark, thank you, Mark. Good job.
Since I am too busy doing other things. So, this one is from Facebook, from Lucas Coffee. And it's a two-part question, one from a person named Phil and one for himself. But Phil wants to know why the UK gets cool, different book covers than the US. Who decides that, and what goes into that process?
So we tend to be very heavily involved in all of the US releases, but that keeps us so busy that we do not have a ton of time for all the other releases. We can generally, the UK kind of takes the number 2 slot, but mostly it's we let the UK publisher do their thing because they know their market, and we will offer feedback on like the covers that they send and things like that. Obviously, the text between the books is the same, and we will decide if they say we need to split a book because of publishing realities. We will decide in-house where we split them, but it comes down to different philosophies at the various publishers. So Tor, as a publisher, has a philosophy that they like to brand each series separately by having one artist do all the work for a given series, but then if you have a different series, use a different artist so that it's easy to tell on the shelf that this is a different series with its own kind of identity. And that's just been their long-standing practice. My publisher, Gallant's, in the UK, instead feels like they like to have an author be branded as having the same illustrator for the covers for all of their books. And so they try to pick an illustrator who can do a wide variety of different books, but all make them feel cohesive as the same author's thing. And so that's the big division. If you like the UK covers better, it is because the UK audience tends to prefer a less illustrative and more symbolic cover for their fantasy novels. This is just something that is a difference between the two markets. Now, that's not to say every US reader instead wants the heavily illustrated painting of something happening from the books. That just tends to be what more people like in the US. My experience has been that it's a pretty narrow margin. Like 40% of US people would prefer to have the more symbolic cover, like the UK, and a percentage of the UK audience would rather have the heavily illustrated kind of beautiful painting cover that is more common in the US. That said, George moved very quickly away from the US style cover to a UK style cover. Game of Thrones, the first one, had a very traditional American fantasy cover, and then they quickly started doing UK style symbol covers instead. And he has been the trendsetter for the bulk of the 2000s when it comes to epic fantasy. And so you do see more reach of the UK style because that's what George did. And so that's why the new Mistborn covers, for instance, are taking a more symbolic approach than an illustrative approach. And really, we're wanting to see what people's reaction to those are. If they would rather have them be illustrated or if they would rather have them be symbolic or something like that. So, anyway.
Sorry, the other half of the question from Lucas was for himself, and they'd like to know how you unwind from a high-stress day to, in quotes, take care of yourself, or does your level 75 mood you mentioned last time keep a lot of that stress from affecting you?
It does. I am not a high-stress person because of that. I do get tired. So a high-stress day is actually a tiring day. There are very few days for me that I would count as high stress. Working on a book is never high stress. Working on a book is always very even for me. High stress, the only kind of high stress things I do, like if I have an important meeting for like movie things where like if I have to sit down, this wasn't for one of my things, but the first time I went to Bad Robot and did a brainstorming session with J.J. Abrams, right? That's stressful because J.J.'s a very good filmmaker who knows his stuff, and I don't want to come off as an idiot. during the brainstorming session, right? That is very high stress for me. The other thing that can be high stress for me is performing in a way that I am not comfortable doing. Like, Dan would really like me to appear on his, Dan Wells does a live role-playing thing, which you guys should all check out because Dan and Howard and Charlie are friends of mine, Charlie Holmberg, are on it as well as some other people, and they are all very funny, high-energy people who like to role-play. And they've invited me, and I do want to go on at some point, but that's the sort of thing that would be very high stress for me, right? Having to perform as a role player instead of in a format where I'm comfortable, such as talking about writing, would probably be pretty high stress, just because I've never done that before, and I'm not sure if I will do a good job. And so that's why I haven't gone on yet, is just because it sounds very stressful. Most things do not faze me. Public speaking does not faze me. Going on tour does not faze me. Doing a live stream does not faze me. I am pretty even keel, as we talked about last time. But I do get exhausted, and the times I'm likely to get exhausted are after a long book signing. This won't be as bad as a book signing, because the book signing, number one, will be longer. This would be a short book signing. But also, the rapid fire questions, like I can't sit and tell a story for 10 minutes when it's a book signing, because I have to answer questions when people are coming through the line. Doing that, keeping track of all the names, so I'm writing the right person's name, and while I'm answering really, and the detailed Cosmere questions are the ones that fry my brain a little bit, because I am trying to balance remembering someone's name, having a good conversation with them, making sure they feel like they had a good time, because they might have waited for 7 hours to see me, and then they're going to get 30 seconds. And I want to make sure that those 30 seconds, that at least I'm not ruining the experience by not being, by not engaging them. I don't want to be ignoring them. So that's all on my brain. Then they will often have a very detailed lore question, which requires me to turn on a very different part of my brain, which is a more exhausting part of my brain, and try to off-the-cuff answer questions that oftentimes, if I need to answer for myself in my writing, I have a huge wiki that I'm going through to remind myself of the decisions I've made and things like that. Mix that with the grueling nature of 7 hours or 8 hours in a chair and then writing, and then I'm doing fine motor writing, right? I'm writing names instead of just the signature and quotes from the books, so my hand will start to ache. And I don't want to make it sound like this is a terrible job, because you compare that to what someone has to go through working construction, my job is easy. But it is really mentally taxing to be doing all of these things at once. And so it's very hard, for instance, at the end of that, to go to my room, hotel room, and write. It's actually the worst part is often I will have had to get up earlier than I want to, because maintaining my sleep schedule while on tour doesn't often align with flights and things. So I'm often sleep deprived as well. And then what do I do then? That's when you see me go back to the hotel room, and I will just want to watch someone play a game of Magic on Twitch. If I am totally brain fried, that's what I'm going to do. I can't even really watch a movie or something like that, because the way my brain works is I will need to be analyzing the story structure and the characterization and things, and it will be extra taxing. And normally that's not very taxing, but after an 8-hour signing, I'm brain dead, right? And I've been talking the whole time, so my voice probably hurts. And that's when I just want something that I can just watch like that. So that's why you Twitch people are great, do a great service, because sometimes what we just need is something relaxing. And I will on tour sometimes bring a game to play myself instead. But that becomes harder because then I have to have like a game system, or I have to make sure I've got a mouse for my computer and stuff like that. And I can't afford to get too engaged by the game, because if I do, I will stay up too much later than I should, and then that will add to the sleep deprived nature, even if I stay up like an extra half hour, because I'm like, oh, I need to finish this part of the game. Yeah. There's when Brandon is brain fried. You can ask Emily this if she's ever on the stream again. So you can ask her what it's like when I call her after a signing to say goodnight. Often I am being driven by the chauffeur, because now I let the publisher give me chauffeurs. There's an addendum to the story I told earlier. If you didn't hear it, you can go watch it on on YouTube. Where we will have this whole thing up. But after that big tour where I was worried about being late, and I left my computer at the airport and all of this stuff, the publisher said, you sure you don't want to just do this the way that other big authors do it, where you get flown to each stop instead of driving there yourself, and someone picks you up and drives you around and takes you where you need to go? And I said, you know what? We will do that from now on. You were right, and I was wrong, and I'm just going to let you do it. Though I still won't let them put me in the really nice hotels, because while I like staying at like the Ritz-Carlton, which Harriet loves the Ritz, so she would always have them put her in the Ritz, and so they're like, Brandon must love the Ritz too, which the Ritz, don't get me wrong, Ritz is great. But oftentimes, the really nice hotels are not convenient to where we're going. Let's say I land in Chicago or whatnot, right? Well, I am most likely going to be signing somewhere in the suburbs, right? And so I land at O'Hare, and the nice hotels are always downtown. So the publisher will be like, we're going to put him in the nicest hotel we can find. He is our biggest author. We want him to be happy. And so we find the most expensive, most wonderful hotel, and then I get to sit in traffic for 2 hours after I land to be driven to the hotel to drop off my bags, and then sit in traffic for 2 more hours being driven back to the suburbs to go to the book signing, and then be driven, by then there's no traffic because by then it's 2 a.m., but be driven back to the hotel after the signing, and then the next day being driven to the airport through traffic again. And the publicists who set this up just don't understand that when I'm on tour, I would rather not be spending 6 hours in a car, particularly since timing can be tight. And yeah, so I have them put me in an airport hotel, usually a nice airport hotel. But then I land at the airport, get driven to the book signing. If there's time, I get to go to the hotel and actually relax and things like that, and then get driven back. And the next morning, I can either walk or take a shuttle directly to the airport and not sit in traffic. So there's a life hack if you ever become a best-selling author that they want to put you in the Ritz-Carlton when you go on tour. Don't let them.
This one from Ash says, Brandon, what did you think about the lack of a story for the latest Magic the Gathering set?
I am afraid I can't speak to this because I have insider information, and anything I say would risk in giving you guys hints about things that are covered by my NDA. So I can just say it is a shame that there is not a story to read for the latest Magic the Gathering expansion. And I'll leave it there.
Cool. This next one from Twitter says, Hi, Brandon. Would love to hear you talk about the relationship between authors and publishers. What are some trends you are seeing in your revenue breakdown, or maybe just trends you're seeing?
Okay, let me see what I can talk about here. I don't know how much this will be of interest to the general public of you, talking about deep business stuff and things. But the biggest trend I'd mentioned on a previous stream is the increasing push toward digital. Not a push by the publisher, but a push by audiences. This is a bigger deal for authors whose books are longer, like mine in epic fantasy. But we are on Starsight, which is one of my shorter books, was only 17% print. So, of course, audiobook is the big game changer of the last 5 years. The 5 years before that, it was the shift to ebook, and now because Audible has done such a great job becoming a service that a lot of people have converted to audiobooks. It's the only real big growth segment of the market right now. So if you are publishing right now, make sure you're paying attention to your audiobook rights. And know that there are a lot of people who will buy those audiobook rights if you do withhold them from the publisher, which is getting harder and harder to do because the publishers are seeing this shift. Most of the time, someone else will give you a better deal than the publisher will for your audiobook rights. There is Recorded Books who do audiobooks.com, who are trying very hard to be an Audible competitor, and they are fantastic people. I actually like the people at Audible as well. All of my contacts there have been great, but Recorded Books and audiobooks.com are giving it a go of making sure it's not an audiobook monopoly, which is something that I really appreciate as someone who would really rather there be a market rather than a monopoly for audiobooks. So, if you haven't checked them out, they're good. If you are indie publishing, make sure that you are considering doing an audiobook yourself by hiring it out rather than by recording it yourself, but you can record it yourself. So, big trend number 1, audiobooks. Something to keep your eyes on. What other big trends are there happening in publishing? New authors are harder to launch than they used to be. It is just kind of a fact of the market now that has become more crowded because of indie publishing and Amazon entering as a publisher as well as a book distributor means that more crowded market and less of a drive toward smaller books in marketing materials. Like I said earlier in the stream, a new writer before could kind of count on a certain number of sales simply by the fact that people who were browsing bookstore shelves would see a brand new author in the new author bay and one book and say, oh, I'm going to give this person a try. The traditional publishing world has become more bestseller driven than it used to be, even though it's always been somewhat bestseller driven. And the marketing material and things like this, what Amazon wants to show on its front page, what what the other ebook publishers, Apple and Google and Kobo and people like that want to show on the page is generally more bestseller driven, and it makes it much harder, therefore, to get noticed. The other name of the game these days that I don't like very much is that you have to pay Amazon to market your book. This depends. It doesn't matter who you are. Most book sales now and advertising is coming by actually buying ads on Amazon on specific authors' books pages. Like my pages on Amazon, if you go to the Way of Kings page, is a prime marketing spot for other authors, and you will be able to count 4 or 5 paid different books being paid to be shown on that page if you go there. And I don't blame these authors at all. It's not about the authors, but they are forced to do this because if you are a smaller author or an indie author or an author that a publisher is launching, the only way to get any eyeballs on your page these days is to pay Amazon to put advertisements for your book on other people's book pages, which just rubs me the wrong way for a lot of different reasons. And it is kind of an unfortunate era of the market we've entered in where your ability to pay for ads for your books is basically paying the person who is selling your books. And there's always been some of this, right? Like if you go into a Barnes & Noble, all the books at the front of the store are there because of something we call co-op. Co-op is where the Barnes & Noble has come to the publisher and said, hey, we've got this cool space at the front of the store that people see when they come in. If you give us 50 cents more of each book you sell, you can be on there. Which, ideally, we would love all that space to be going to the books that's for non necessarily market driven reasons. But I can accept co-op. It's actually kind of a nicer form of an advertisement because Barnes and Noble then has the incentive to make sure that that's an attractive space, that it's selling well. Because if they pick a book that doesn't sell well for their co-op space, they've wasted their co-op space because it's a partnership. The advertising that is going on Amazon, they don't care if your book sells or not. They're making more money from most of these indie authors, probably off of the advertising than they are from selling the books. And so the incentives are misaligned now for Amazon for many of these books. Not all of them. Like the people who really know what they're doing are definitely making more from the ads than they are spending on them, and that's when ads are working. But a lot of these people are newer authors who are forced to spend the amount of money on ads that someone else would spend and not get recouped on those sales because they are newer in their career. And so suddenly you have this thing where Amazon is now an advertising company, not a book publishing company when it comes to books. And that just makes me very uncomfortable. So there's another direction for you. But it is, at the same time, it's really hard to launch a new author now because the traditional methods that were used are drying up, and there's a lot more crowding, and there are a lot more people who are going toward familiar favorites, which benefits me quite a bit, than are going toward new authors. So if you want to help the genre, looking out for new authors whose debut books are coming out is certainly, I think, one of the best things that we can do as a genre, is just at least give them some consideration, at least like read the sample chapters that you can get for free, because the digital revolution has really helped with that, right? Like, it's so much easier to just be like, hey, I wonder what this book is about, and go read 5 chapters of it, which I love. Like, that's helped us a ton. And I don't want to sound like I'm all doom and gloom, because some of this has been really good. Like, one of the things the digital revolution has done is it has made niche books way more viable than they used to be, which doesn't benefit people like me, which is a nice counterbalancing factor. What this means is, once upon a time, because if you were a traditional publisher, you had to print a certain number of copies of a book if you were going to actually publish this book, because you couldn't be profitable paying all of your staff off of printing, say, 1,000 copies of a book and selling it most of the time for the big publishers. They have expensive, things like attorneys. They have very expensive rent for these big buildings in New York. They have all of these people they're paying, and they need to make sure that the books they're selling are each at least reaching a certain threshold of sales. Because of that, let's say that that you really wanted to read the book that would be perfect for you would be mysteries about people who love cats who are also starring LGBTQ characters, right? Like, that's what you want to read. Well, for traditional publishing, and the past in particular, they'd be like, we can do cat books, we can do LGBTQ friendly books, we can do mysteries, but we can't intersect these because the interest gets so narrow that suddenly it's like a Venn diagram where the people who really want that are a smaller audience. And what this meant was kind of marginalization of smaller interests in publishing, because every book needed to try to hit the widest audience that was possible. But now, if you can, as an independent author, sell 1,000 copies of a book because you do not have all the overhead of the publishers, and you can write a really great book that sells 1,000 copies at a fairly reasonable price point, and you can maybe write them kind of quick, so what you're selling is more of like, a 50,000 word book, and you're going to do a series, and you're going to have 4 of those come out a year, and those 1,000 people love these books because it's like, wow, this is totally my where my interests are. You can have people doing that and making a living, and have a really kind of spectacular thing where a book that may in the past have failed. Like I've got a friend, John Henry, who wrote really great series of science fiction books that were basically JAG in space. JAG is not a series anymore, but it was military lawyers, right? So it was a science fiction series about military lawyers, and they released the books. They were really good, and they did not sell. And what they found is the people who like lawyer books did not want to read the science fiction thing, and the people who wanted to read science fiction did not want so much lawyering in the books. They were too niche, which is, you might say, odd, because sometimes some books hit that will grab both of those audience, right? There's sometimes you'll have a book be out, and instead of Venn diagram where, the overlap is what happens, is you get both circles. And that does happen, but it's hard to judge in fiction when that's going to happen or when you're just going to get the overlap. And so those books just flopped, unfortunately. He came back with a new name and did the Lost Fleet novels, which are also spectacular. And if you like military science fiction, I would highly recommend them. They are great books. And those were big successes because they didn't do the narrow thing. They're like, we're just going to do the best military science fiction type story that we can. So in the new world, this was all before that, it's possible that since there was no one else doing JAG in space, that the narrow people in the middle would love that series to the point that they would support it, and its sales would actually be really good for that audience because they buy every one that comes out. You can have that in the current industry where you just couldn't for most of publishing. So that's a really good thing about the change to digital that has been happening. It has diversified the genres, but it's so much harder to get attention than it used to be. That was way more than you guys wanted, wasn't it? This is the fun side of publishing. I actually really like talking about this stuff, but I know it gets a little boring when I start to talk about the background stuff in the publishing industry.
This next one is from Alicia Grouse. She says, do you read other modern fantasy books, and specifically wondering about the First Law or Lightbringer? But maybe you could just talk about what other modern ones.
Yeah. I mean, Lightbringer is fantastic. Anybody who likes my style of writing fantasy books with kind of the hard magic systems and large cast of characters and things like this, like Brent Weeks and I must have just grown up reading the same books and have the same mindset because we tend to write very similar books naturally, and I really like his books. They work really well for me. Joe Abercrombie, I think, is awesome and is a genius, and he is really a cool person to hang out with. First Law is a little too brutal for me. I'm maybe a little bit more of a prude. Maybe too much of one. I don't know. But like for instance, Game of Thrones was too much for me. Specifically Daenerys's plotline in Game of Thrones in the first book. Like I read that book. I'm like, wow, this is genius. I just can't take any more of this. I can't read another book where was she 14 in that book, is treated like she was treated in that book. And that's not value judgment against Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is really well written. It just was not for me. And so Joe's books tend to be over that line for me, but not all of them. And Joe Abercrombie is just a great guy. If you ever get to go to a convention and see Joe on a panel, he's one of those people that I could just watch for hours talk about stuff because he's entertaining, he's engaging, but he's also just fun. It's like the person that you would love to hang out with. But I do like to try to keep track of what people are doing and what other writers are writing. And so I do like Nora's books quite a bit, and Kay Jemison is a very good writer. Very good is probably underselling how good a writer that Nora is. And those do have to come with a content warning as well. Not necessarily the level of the others, but there is some content in Nora's books. But I also like reading the old masters. Like last stream, I think it was, I talked about how criminal I think it is that Jane Yolen is underread in sci-fi fantasy. And I don't know what her sales numbers are, but whatever they are, they're underread. She's underread. She should be read on the level that J.K. Rowling has read, because Jane Yolen is amazing. So read some Jane Yolen, guys. But yeah, I like keeping track of what people are doing. I like reading new books. Joshua sent me a book by a guy named Nick Martell to read, and it was quite good. It's not coming out until later this year. But Kingdom of Liars. Kingdom of Liars is a pretty good book. It's another one of those debuts where it's like good to watch what new authors are doing. Here's another one of these for you, Kara. And so, but yeah, I'm currently reading Victoria Schwab's Darker Shade of Magic, which is really good.
This next one is from Radiant Mistborn. I wonder where they got that from.
Mm.
How do you write an overpowered or powerful character in a way that makes them relatable? I always end up making them the tortured hero trope, and they don't seem realistic.
Okay, that is very common. And some of my early books before I got published, that was like my go-to as well. Certainly is a place you can go, but it does feel old if you do it too much. So there are lots of ways to do this. One of the best ways is to make sure that there is conflict for the character that their powers cannot solve. This is the old Superman thing. If you want to tell a great Superman story, you do want his powers to be able to solve some of the problems and him to be able to use those powers, but you also want him to have deep conflict in his story that his powers just don't touch upon. And so when Superman is working, it's often things like I'm faster than a speeding bullet, but that doesn't help me interface with human relations and make this woman that I'm falling in love with think that doesn't help me on a date that much to be able to leap a building in a single bound. And those sorts of things are part of the relatable things. The idea that you are really, really strong in a certain realm, but in other realms and other situations, you feel like you are completely powerless, is a very, very human and natural emotion. I talked about it earlier, right? You get me on the live stream talking about books in my life, and I can go for hours and tell lots of fun stories. But if I have to role play in front of people, I'm going to get stressed because that's just not something I've done. And always in the past, role playing was a way to blow off steam and to not have to worry about whether I'm being entertaining or not, because most of my life is about me trying to create things that are going to be entertaining. And so the concept of doing something like that suddenly I have to move from the realm of this is just me relaxing to the realm of now people are watching and need to be entertained. I'm suddenly not great in that situation. Not a situation I want to put myself in. And so, taking people out of their realm of expertise and forcing them to have to interact in places where they are not an expert is a great way to make an overpowered character, quote unquote, really sympathetic. Terry Pratchett can make death very interesting and sympathetic in the books about death by removing him from some of those situations. And death is probably, in the Discworld, among the most powerful entities that exist. But of course, you also come back to the great magic systems are ones that have great limitations. Sanderson's second law. And a character who is very, very powerful but limited in excruciatingly emotional ways is also a great way to have a very powerful character have to be unable to do everything that they want to do. So
this next one is from Robert because he asked me so nicely. He said, Brandon, if you were unpublished right now, would you go traditional or self-publishing?
I would go hybrid because of the way I would want to do things. And let me explain what I mean by that. I would want to go hybrid because I know that I want to write big epic fantasies with large budgets and lots of artwork and the sort of things that I'm just very ambitious about. Not to say you can't be ambitious, because Worm is self-published and it is quite ambitious work. But generally, self-publishing, indie publishing these days has fallen into this trend of if you are the slower you are, the worse indie publishing tends to be for you. Not that you can't do it, but the worse it tends to be. If you are somebody if you're a Connie Willis, for instance, another great writer whose books I would recommend. If you are Connie Willis and you spend 4 years researching a book because it's going to be a time travel historical, and you end up writing a 400,000 word, took you 4 years to write, historical epic, that is generally not going to be as good a match for self-publishing. Again, not to say you can't do it, but not as good a match. And so, since I want to do Stormlight books, and they're going to be every 3 years, as long as I stay on the ball, that is a fairly poor match for what indie publishing tends to be really good at. I'll add the asterisk to this that I'm not an expert in indie publishing. I know more than the average person, but not more than the average indie published author. So you should talk to them. But indie publishing also has a lot of advantages in that you get lots more control, and the kind of ability to target a niche audience, like I talked about. But also, even if your books are not niche, if they have wide appeal, there is still indie publishing can be very good for you. Particularly if what you're writing can either naturally be split into smaller installments, or you are naturally writing shorter, faster-paced books. The type of books that when someone reads one, their immediate thought is, I need the next one right now, and you have 20 more of them for them to do that on. Those tend to be the really big successes in indie publishing, where you get to the end of the book and you can just immediately buy the next one. Friends I have who are indie published tend to like the method where you spend a few years writing a whole bunch of books and then you release them all in 1 year with a big marketing blitz, and like one a month for 12 months is one of the ways. It's not the only way. And so what I would do if I were writing what I write is I would start with my big epic fantasies, and I would sell them to the top tier publishers only. I would probably not send to the second string publishers, even though there are some very good second string publishers. But I would send to the big five basically only. And I would send to major agents. And if I get a bite, I would go with it and see if it works. If I do not, and I have sent that book around, I would set that book aside and I would save it for a few years, as the next year I'm sending out another one. And once I have 3 or 4 of those that then have not sold, then I would take matters into my own hands and I would release them in quick succession. As epic fantasies, probably not one a month, but one every 4 months with marketing blitzes on each of them. And I would then, because I have that backlog, I would see if I'm able to get things to take off with indie publishing. And my next steps would depend on how that year goes with releasing those books. If I start to gain traction in indie publishing, if it's working, then I would probably just double down on that and stick with it. If it's okay but not great, I would then start gathering another round of books to send to New York, and I would probably maintain the indie career by writing novellas in those worlds that I self-published, so that people can continue to have something new from those worlds and continue to build that fan base with the chance that something will start on fire and really take off, and then I can go that direction. If I do sell something with a big publisher, and if you do, then I don't know that I would take these small deals that used to be a good idea to take in the old days. For instance, I was offered $5,000 per book for 2 books when Tor bought Elantris. Joshua, my intrepid agent, managed to convince them to give me $10,000 a book for 2 books instead. Back then, $10,000, that was an above average advance. 5 tends to be around the average, but I don't know if that's been updated in a while. There's Tobias Buckell that used to do polls to find out what advances were. Nowadays, I don't know if I would take that. because of the chance you're going to get lost being much higher. I probably still would, but I would think really hard about it unless I can get into that contract some serious promotional and marketing push from the publisher, because getting an advance from a publisher is not necessarily just about how much money is going in your pocket. It is a vote of confidence from the publisher. The amount of money they're paying in advance is the amount of money they expect you to earn off of that book. And if they pay you $100,000 as an advance, then they are priced into trying to make that book sell like a bestseller. If they are paying you $5,000 for advance, then they are not. And the book that they paid $100,000 for, that went to a bidding war, or the agent was really stingy and it just ended up working out that way, is the one that will get all the marketing money, and it will become self-fulfilling. So it is always hard. Your biggest hurdle to becoming an author is finishing your first book. And I still maintain that is true. If you have finished a novel, you are in a very select crowd, and you have become my colleague by doing that. Selling it is the next hurdle, but actually then making a career is an almost equally large hurdle, unfortunately. So.
This next one is from Sarshare Gaming. I'm kind of adapting it to a question.
Okay.
Would you ever consider writing a cyberpunk era 4 for Mistborn, or are you going to be doing just the 4 eras?
I would consider, and I've talked about before, liking that idea. Once I did the Wax and Wayne novels, it became a natural thing to ask if there is a step between eras, the 1980s and the science fiction era, and a cyberpunk type era would make a lot of sense. The caveat to that is I have a lot on my plate in finishing the Cosmere already, and so I can't make any promises. But it does seem like it would be a natural fit to do some. So the original Mistborn series was each between 200 and 250,000 words. For a frame of reference, Way of Kings books tend to be between 400 and 450,000. And the Wax and Wayne books tend to be between 100 and 110,000. And so having another 100 to 110,000 word faster paced, shorter series, shorter in total word count, would make a lot of sense, because the era 3, the 1980s era, is going to go back to the 200 to 250,000 word size books.
This next one is from Facebook, from Cody Brower. They say, nowadays it seems like fantasy is replete with filth. I have a hard time finding quality fantasy. Thank you, Brandon. What are your thoughts on the trajectory fantasy is heading? Where it seems authors are clamoring over each other to each be edgier than the next?
So this obviously plays into your own personal preferences. I do think George opened the doors for grittier fantasy to become more mainstream. It has always been a part of the genres, but George's success is part of what opened that door, and it was the new trend for a while. I don't know that I would take the same perspective you do. I don't want to contrast or say it's wrong, but I think it is a good thing that fantasy is open to a wide variety of different types of stories, and I think we are on the whole better off because of that. But what it does mean is, if what you want is something that has mature themes without detailed descriptions of mature content, then it is more difficult. And I don't know if myself making it big is an indication that there is still an audience for mature themes without mature content in fantasy, but I would like to hope that it is, and that I think the umbrella for fantasy being larger is better. And I certainly hope that people continue to like that. But I don't know. We don't have Terry Pratchett any longer as kind of one of the also fantasy authors who liked mature themes without mature content in his books, since he has tragically passed away. and that leaves us in a situation where there is more. But I will say this: it doesn't ever feel to me like publishers are demanding more. I've never had a publisher ask me to include anything more than my personal threshold for content would allow. They've never even come close to that. They want to publish good books that are the vision of the author who is writing them. Regardless, the content is secondary to is this book something that the author loves and that we love. Oh, this is on the wrong page. Just one of them. It just flipped around. There we are. I didn't know what to do for a second. And so, do I see this going further than it is? My instincts, though I don't read everything, have been that we have kind of the grimdark movement pushed very hard into fantasy and then drew back a little bit. And you saw myself and Name of the Wind get published. And it's feeling like it's hitting an equilibrium right now, but I honestly am not sure that I'm good at tracking this, because about half of what I read is YA, and while YA is not edited for content, it does tend to be less content heavy, and so not sure where we stand in regards to that. It is honestly not something I've paid a ton of attention to. I know Terry Brooks has spoken about this a lot, because it is something Terry Brooks finds that he does not like about how the genre has gone, because Terry very much likes his books and things to be family friendly, and he prefers that format of fantasy. But it's not something I've tracked nearly as much. I just kind of do my thing and hope that my thing continues to be something that people enjoy reading.
The next one is from Naja Win.
Mm-hmm.
So you said you play Esper in Magic the Gathering, the central color of which is blue. All the shards shown lack blue. Is this intentional, saving the shards you identify with for the latter bits of the Cosmere?
So yeah, if you were going to say blue, who is blue? I would say that definitely we do have some blue shards, but it didn't just naturally fit to do the stories the blue way. It just didn't happen, right? So there are some. It wasn't that I was saving back the traditionally sneaky or conniving shards, or at least the powers that are related to that. It's just how it played out. It was very natural for Mistborn to play around with black aligned and white aligned, as if you are giving like a single color to the various shards. And then on Roshar, it just made a lot of sense for what I was building to have a red aligned, a white aligned, and a green aligned. And I don't really think the shards that way. I can retrofit a magic color identity to them when thinking about it. But White Sands, there's some blue going on with what is happening there. So you have seen some, but you're right.
Covert Rabbit asks if you tend to like the audiobooks of your work.
I do tend to. I tend to either pick a specific audiobook reader myself or have my team do it, and I think they are all good. We did replace Warbreaker. Lightsong just sounded wrong.
Too surfery.
Too surfer dude-ish. Though I do know some people who preferred that version. So, but I just happen to love Michael and Kate because of the Wheel of Time audiobooks, and they do the majority of my books. And everybody else we've gotten is really good also.
Andrew Berenson wants to know what your favorite flavor of ice cream is.
Favorite flavor of ice cream is Baskin Robbins has the pralines and cream. I tend to really like the some version of vanilla with suspended inclusions. So particularly if they are caramely in nature, any sort of moose tracks or things like that, I do tend to like quite a bit also. But if I'm at an ice cream place, I am probably going to get the closest thing to Prawlings and cream. Though my secondary love is like a cheesecake flavored ice cream. I do think those are pretty good. And if I'm doing more of a gelato, I'm generally going to go with the fruit flavors because I think gelato just tastes really good with the fruit flavors. Like a lemon gelato is probably my favorite gelato.
Stubble McShave says, you say that fantasy can be any genre with dragons. However, you've never had dragons in your book. Can you see yourself putting some classical fantasy monsters into your fiction?
Yeah. There are dragons in the Cosmere. The very second Cosmere book I wrote was called Dragonsteel. Dragons are the one classical fantasy thing that will make an appearance in the Cosmere. You haven't seen any dragons that actually look like dragons in any of the books yet, because dragons in the Cosmere are shapeshifters in kind of the classic, D&D trope style of thing. They can all become human.
And Shadiversity just jumped on.
Oh, hey, Shad, how you doing? So,
this next one is from Cosmere.es. They're your people in Spain.
Yeah.
Their group. They want to know how Perfect State was born and asking if you will come back to develop the idea.
So Perfect State grew out of me wanting to. So a lot of the classic sort of cyberpunk idea of Matrix sort of ideas. We live in a simulation, and this is just a terrible thing, right? And that's a pretty cool story, right? Like, I don't know that I would want to discover I'm in a simulation. But as often is the origin of some of my stories, I'm thinking about, well, can I reverse that trope, right? What if living in a simulation were actually there was really good reason for us to do it, and it actually turned out pretty well, right? Like, the idea of we solve overpopulation by giving everybody their own perfect place to live, in which they get to be some sort of cool hero and or political figure. That felt like it was a cool thing to explore, where the story was not talking about how terrible this was, but was instead talking about the natural problems that arise. And I consider those two different things, right? Like, if I espouse a specific political philosophy, not to make this political, it is not me saying that political philosophy is without problems, because it probably is. It is just that I feel like the problems that philosophy has are ones that I would rather deal with, and I think are easier to deal with than the problems that another political philosophy might have. And so, like with Perfect State, the point of the story was not, hey, this would be perfect, even though it's called Perfect State. That's kind of the irony of the title, right? It's that this is going to have some problems. Let's explore what those problems would be and how the people who live in this system deal with it. I could see myself coming back, like the two main characters of the story definitely have different goals and philosophies, and that is not resolved at the end of the story, even though the story itself is resolved. So I can see coming back even to those same characters. But there's a lot on my plate, so I can't promise when or if. I do know where the story would go, but that's very common for me.
Kenwick wants to know if there are any nonfiction military books that you've read to give you ideas to write battle sequences or strategies for your books.
I am fond of John Keegan's History of Warfare. I know a lot of people think that Keegan is overly reductive in his discussions of things. But I found that book to be very handy. So if you want a nice nonfiction book, History of Warfare is a good one. Guns, Germs, and Steel is also the classic go back to. I enjoyed that not as much, and it is also received some complaints from people for the same reason, over reductive. But Guns, Germs, and Steel is the classic go-to, and it is recommended for a reason. It does give you a pretty good picture. You just have to realize that the author is espousing, he's trying to set a certain concept, trying to prop it up and explain it, and makes a good argument, but it is not the only argument to be made.
And many people are wondering what your thoughts on Malazan.
Malazan's great. Last one, guys. Last one. Malazan is great. Malazan, really steep learning curve. I love actually how steep its learning curve is because it is kind of becomes a really good case study for learning curves in fantasy books. But I do think Stephen Erickson is an excellent writer. His imagery in particular is just spectacular. And man, can that guy write a scene. So yeah, good job. Malazan's great stuff. Malazan deserved to sell better than it did. And it's interesting for some kind of hobbyist history of the fantasy genre sort of things. And Malazan was not a flop. Let me indicate that. It wasn't, but it didn't take off, I know, as much, particularly in America, as people thought that it should, and I agree with that. But it had some interesting things happening because it was launched. It's the only kind of major fantasy that I can think of that was launched between Assassin's Apprentice and Elantris. There's a real kind of dry area in epic fantasy. There were several big launches, but none of them took off. How about that? And Malazan's really the only thing we can look at during that period that even managed to make some sort of sales. But if you remember what was happening in the late 90s into the early 2000s, you will recognize two enormous publishing forces in Harry Potter and Twilight, basically sucking the air out of the room when it came to a lot of discussions about fantasy. I don't know if those things are simple correlations or if there's a cause and effect there, but I also do think the fantasy genre had some growing pains in the late 90s, which is when the 90s are when fantasy really became a major force, with Robert Jordan leading that charge. The Wheel of Time, there had never been anything in fantasy sales-wise like the Wheel of Time. Even, like Tolkien is its own weird thing. So Tolkien, but there had just never been something that was as large with mainstream appeal, published in hardcover first thing in epic fantasy. And it was followed by several successive big hits, such as I've mentioned it on the stream, right? Game of Thrones came out in like 96 and like 95 or 94. You guys have to look it up. Somewhere right around there was Sword of Truth. And then Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb was like 97. And these were all major series that came out and sold really well and made a lot of mainstream publishing outside sci-fi fantasy pay more attention to sci-fi fantasy. And then there were a string of high-profile flops, the most infamous of which is The Fifth Sorceress, which you can go read the history of and why it flopped as a series and some of those things. But then there's Malazan, and Malazan feels like it was fighting an uphill battle in that time period to launch as a new fantasy series. And then there was also the problem that the books were generally out in the UK before they were out in the US, even though Erickson, I believe, is Canadian. I could be wrong on that. But he sold first in the UK. And so they had a real trouble because this was back in the bookstore era, not the ebook era, which means that if you bought Malazan, the first book, at the bookstore, and Tor hadn't gotten around to finishing the series yet because they were releasing them on kind of a slower rollout, you could just order the UK editions, which you did, right? Of course, you read the first two books and you're like, wow, there's two more out in the UK? I'll just order those and have them shipped in. But what this ended up doing is then the death spiral that I mentioned way earlier in this stream, where the books were not selling as well in the US, then the bookstores were not ordering as many, so they weren't on the shelves, so then people couldn't buy them, and all the fans kept going to the UK editions, and I think that may have had something to do with it. I am armchairing this, though, because I am not privy to the actual conversations that were happening with Stephen Erickson and his publisher at the time.
The Breakfast Cake wants to know what children's book you'd recommend as an introduction to deeper reading.
Children's book to recommend as an introduction to deeper reading. I would recommend finding out what that kid really wants to read, whatever it is, and be excited about it and read it with them. Doesn't matter. If you want people to read deeper reading, which generally means generally said by an older person who wants a child to grow up to love the books that they loved, which is a very natural thing to want. I would recommend you start with making sure they love reading and don't see books as a chore, and don't see your influence forcing them to you don't want to imply in any way, even accidentally, that a child's taste is wrong, that the books they love are the wrong books to be reading. And if they come to love reading, they will find their way to a lot of different books. And if when they are young, they learn that their taste is wrong, or that books are boring because they are given books that don't appeal to them repeatedly, then what you're going to do is you're going to have a child who does not grow up loving reading, and they will never find their way to the books that you want them to read. So let people enjoy what they enjoy, and try to understand why they enjoy what they enjoy. And for my children, this has been, for Dallin, it has been Dogman. Joel, who is older now, loves the Wings of Fire books. Those seem like great books to get people to like fantasy. They are. He just loves talking about them. His other favorite series is the Janitors series by Heather Whiteside, which is a very fun middle grade series. But find out what they want and match a book to them rather than trying to get them to read something that may not appeal to them.
Kansas Claire says, "Hey Brandon, which book required the most drafts and for what reason? Or rather, which was the most frustrating for you to write?"
So Memory of Light. Oh no! I don't. You have to come around here so they can see if you want. I am sorry for anyone who is listening on headphones. I don't bang these. Okay, you're gonna. Yep. You
They're
can
all
bang the
gone.
table. You can bang the table. They all left. They left because you screamed so loud.
No.
Oh.
No, these things are all.
1,200.
Oh, they're all gone. Oh, do you mind them?
And I have a weird mask that makes me look weird.
Yeah. Hey, Dallin, do you want to answer a question?
What?
What is your favorite books to read right now? If someone has a 10-year-old who wants to read a book, what is the favorite one?
That's Fear the books.
Yeah, just any books. What would you recommend?
I love Dogman.
Come around to this side. Don't stick your
Oliver
face.
loves Dogman.
Dogman, yeah.
I don't really know because I can't really. I've ADHD. I don't really read.
Well, we read to you. Yeah.
Yeah. I like Spy Penguins.
Spy Penguins is pretty good. You loved Swamp Kid, didn't you?
Yeah, I love Swamp Kid.
Swamp Kid was a great book for you, and there's a DC riff on the Swamp Thing, but done as a kind of kids journal book. You love Diary of a Wimpy Kid books too, don't you?
Yeah.
You like the journal style books quite
Yeah.
a bit.
I don't really read them, so.
Yeah, well, we read them
Ooh,
to
the
you.
sword. Foam swords.
Dallin, you'll be happy to hear you scared many people with your scream.
I do apologize for that. Next time, try not to scream quite so loud
Remember
because
this
people
from the
might be
last
listening.
one?
Em, do you want to come on and show that
No,
you
wait.
are matchy-matchy?
Do you remember this from the last one?
Yes, I do remember.
Oh, that's really cute.
Yeah.
Sorry, I want this sword.
You do want this sword?
Can I have one of these swords?
We'll talk about it later. I think that you were, yeah. But
Did you want to ask Ollie?
Ollie
question?
already said, but do you guys have any questions for Oliver or Dallin? How about for Oliver? Oliver is 7 years old. So, does anyone have a question for Oliver?
We just need to wait for it to catch up.
Yeah,
for a
we need to
second.
wait for it to catch up. So, we will say Emperor's New Groove is a favorite of Emily and mine, and my children hate it. Right? Llama
No.
face?
I love it. It's hilarious.
Okay. You used to hate it, though. You'd grown when we put it on.
Yeah,
We-
because we seen it way too much. So
Okay.
That's why.
That's why.
Well, I think it's funny, but we've seen it a lot of times because you guys always turn it on. I'm like,
Yeah, it became a joke, right? We'd be like, llama face, and you're like, no, not llama face.
Yeah.
So Dallin, what is your favorite Minecraft monster?
Mob.
Favorite mob.
I really my favorite animal is a turtle, but it's a monster, so I would do. I really like Enderman.
Enderman.
I like the Ender Giants. I like the end stuff. I also like the Nether stuff, and I also really like the bees that are coming up. But my favorite would probably be the Piglin Beast, the upcoming mob.
There you go.
Very nice. And Ollie, what's your favorite TV show?
I don't know one.
Well, what YouTuber do you watch the most? Which YouTuber do you like?
A lot.
What's that? But you don't have a favorite.
There's a lot of YouTube.
Who are some of the YouTubers you watch?
He watches Finn play. He watches
You watch
DNTM.
Dan-
Not that much, but
Do you watch
I watch Dan
Unspeakable?
he watches Unspeakable. He likes Garfield, the show.
Oh yeah, you do like Garfield, don't you? No? You sprinkling your nose. There you are. Answers from my children.
Sorry, one other question
Yeah.
for both of them.
Uh-huh.
Does your dad have an easy or hard job?
It's kind of hard, kind of easy, right, Dad?
Yeah.
Kind of hard and kind
Why
of
would you
easy
say that?
writing books. Because some books are hard to write, and some books are just like, oh, this is gonna be easy. Some of them you just have to
You just
two paragraphs.
Mm.
That would be a very short book.
That would be a very short book.
Two paragraphs.
Yeah. I bet there are 2 paragraph books out there because there's some books with no words even. So, all right, guys.
Thanks,
I'm close to wrapping up here, so off you go.
Wait, if they have any more, can we do it in the next one? Answer
Next
those
one, yes,
questions?
you can answer those questions next time.
Well, also, can I have this sword?
We'll talk about it later.
Can you make a red sword or a green sword or other colors?
So there you go. My children decided to invade.
And you were talking about.
I was talking about most revisions on a book. The most
I'm a
difficult.
weirdo. I'm a weirdo too. I'm a weirdo.
Emily.
The most revisions I've ever done a book on is Memory of Light. Memory of Light, being the last Wheel of Time book, but there were an extra large number of editorial passes by different members of Tor or Harriet's team. It was a lot more stressful to all of them than the previous 2, though I was pretty confident in it, and it was not. By then, I was not very I was a little bit stressed with Gathering Storm, but again, not very much because my normal temperament, but also I feel like I have a really good instinct for if a book is good or not. Particularly because of my extensive beta reading program and things like that. Like I know what the response to a book is going to be. It doesn't mean that sometimes I knew Legion 3, even as I was writing it, would be a different sort of book, and different sort of books tend to have a more divisive reaction among people. But I have not released a book and been surprised by the reaction yet. I'm usually well aware of it, and that was the same on the Wheel of Time books. But everyone wanted to make sure Memory of Light was just right, and so lots of revisions were requested, and a few more on my part also were things that I wanted to revise. Otherwise, the hardest book that got released was probably Mistborn 2. For writing a sequel is not something I had as much experience with back then, and had a lot of problems with it in the initial draft. The biggest problem child recently has been the Apocalypse Guard, but that's not released. I did it, and then I did 2 drafts on it, and it wasn't working. I gave it to Dan Wells, who did a draft on it, who made it better, but it's still not right. And so, don't know if that one will ever get released.
DJ Sooth asks, which fantasy universe would your children want to visit the most?
Which fantasy universe? It's going to be Minecraft, right?
Yeah.
There's just no chance it's not Minecraft. My family very much was part of this generation that was very, very invested into Minecraft, and the kids keep coming back to it. time and time again. So, yeah.
A related question: which universe would you want to introduce them to the most, or maybe have them enjoy the most?
Have them enjoy the most? Probably Pratchett when they're old enough, right? Like, I would like to read them the Tiffany Aching books. I don't know if I can do the We Free Men's accent any justice, however. But Pratchett is my favorite author, and it would be very cool to me if my children shared my appreciation of his works.
And are any of your characters based off real people? If so, can you tell us who?
So characters based off of real people tend to have two caveats to it. One is that generally I'm picking one aspect of the personality of someone I know that I find would make an interesting conflict and or character, and then I build a character around that, but they aren't, they started as a seed from someone I know. The most famous one being Serene, was based on my friend Annie, who shares some attributes with Serene, but Serene is not Annie. Like, if you met Annie, you would be like, oh, maybe I can see it, but definitely not Serene. So there are characters like that have been. And then the other thing is character cameos. There are a lot of cameos based on people I know where I just kind of wrote my friends into the books. The most famous of this being the guys of Bridge 4 are friends and family of mine. And the most notable of which is being Scar, which Scar is an actual character, where the rest of them are kind of background characters, like Leighton, who's based off of Alan Leighton, who is a good friend of mine. And Scar is an actual character in the books because he's the only person I knew who would actually fit into Bridge 4. He's a military man. He's out on orders right now, so we haven't had him for 2 years in writing group, but he's coming back in February, which we're excited by. And a good writer. I did a short story with him once that we co-authored it, and I thought it turned out really well. It's the first time I ever co-authored anything, and he just knocked that one out of the park. So Scar from Bridge 4 is based off of Ethan Scarsdale, and basically is that person. And once in a while with like the people from Bridge 4, like Dre is based on my friend Ryan Dreyer, whose last name is different now when he got married. I always forget Ryan Scott. When he and Drew got married, they picked a name that they could both take rather than taking one of each other's names. And so there are times when I'll be like, hey Ryan, what would Dre say in this situation? Can you read over this paragraph and tell me if I'm doing it right? And I will do that with Scar now and then. Most of the time I only do that with like cameo characters like that, but yeah. And there we are.
Big gong.
So yeah, big gong. This is the pen that ended it. Do you want to take this pen as the last of the pens, and we'll give that to somebody. So that is the pen that ended the 10,000 copies. We'll be doing this as a Kickstarter in June or July. If you guys buy too many copies of this, I will have to do this more. So I guess if you want more streams, make sure that we sell out of copies of the leather-bound Way of Kings, because then I'll have to be here doing it more. But thank you guys for watching. Thanks for keeping me company as I do this, because it is mind-numbingly boring if I don't have some company, and telling stories makes the time pass. We probably won't do one of these next week. It'll probably be a couple weeks, sometime, probably late. How long can you wait on those? So they need to be sooner? Later?
It just depends on how fast we want them.
Yeah.
So,
So sometime in
To be
February.
determined.
To be determined. We'll do another one of these. Thank you guys for putting up on YouTube with all of the problems. We'll try to fix that next time. Bye-bye.